Power shapes every nation, but who holds it and how can mean the difference between freedom and oppression. From one-person rule, where a single decision can change millions of lives, to anarchism's daring vision of a world without rulers, from the iron grip of a single-party state to the noisy clash of multi-party democracy, and even the radical idea of panarchy, where everyone chooses their own government. Each system carries its own promises and its own perils. In this series, we'll uncover how these models of rule shape societies, test human nature, and decide the fate of nations. If this journey into power and politics sparks something in you, hit like, share with someone who questions the world we live in, and subscribe for more deep dives into the systems that govern our lives, because the way we're ruled defines the way we live. Democracy. Democracy is more than just a political system. It is one of humanity's boldest and most ambitious experiments. At its heart lies a daring belief that power should not rest exclusively in the hands of kings, elites, or a privileged minority, but in the collective voice of ordinary people. It is the great equalizer, a system where the opinion of a farmer can weigh as much as that of a billionaire, where a single ballot can carry the strength to challenge centuries of entrenched power. Democracy is not only about rules or governance, it is about dignity, about recognizing that every person's voice has value and that no one should be silenced simply because of their background, wealth, or status. It is both a shield and a sword, protecting the weak from tyranny while giving them the strength to shape their own destiny. Democracy exists in many forms, but its essence is participation. In its rawest expression, it manifests as direct democracy, where people themselves decide on laws and policies, each decision carrying the unfiltered imprint of the collective will. In most cases, however, democracy operates through representation, citizens entrusting leaders with the responsibility of carrying their voices into the chambers of power. This trust is sacred, fragile, and powerful. When honored, it fuels hope, unity, and progress. When betrayed, it breeds disillusionment and anger, slowly eating away at the system from within. Democracy thrives in debate, in the noise of disagreement, and in the friction of compromise. Its strength comes not from silence or conformity, but from the weaving together of many perspectives into a stronger whole. Yet, its greatest enemy is not always dictators or invaders, it is apathy. The moment people begin to doubt that their voice matters, democracy weakens. When citizens give up, when cynicism replaces action, democracy suffocates not with a bang, but with silence. Still, it endures because people rise to defend it. From protests in the streets to the quiet act of voting, democracy is a living truth carried forward by each generation. It is never finished, never guaranteed, and always fragile. But when nurtured, it remains a powerful reminder that true power does not belong to rulers. It belongs to the people who refuse to be ruled without their consent. Direct democracy. Direct democracy is the purest and most unfiltered form of people's power. It is governance stripped of middlemen, lobbyists, and professional politicians, a system where the people themselves hold the pen that writes the law. Here, there are no layers of interpretation, no representatives translating your desires into policies. You, the citizen, are both the architect and the guardian of the rules that shape your life. Direct democracy carries with it a sense of raw intimacy, a closeness between decision and outcome that is rarely found in modern politics. Every person is at once the ruler and the ruled, crafting a society in which their vote does not just echo, it decides. There is an undeniable pride in this, a knowledge that when a law is passed, it wasn't decreed by some distant leader in a chamber of power, but by the collective voice of your own community. But this freedom carries a heavy responsibility. In direct democracy, victories feel sweeter because they are truly yours, but the failures sting deeper for the very same reason. There is no scapegoat, no politician to blame, because the choices made are the reflection of the people themselves. Every success is shared, and every mistake is a mirror that reveals the flaws, emotions, and impulsiveness of society. It demands a population that is informed, attentive, and ready to wrestle with complex issues, because apathy in this system is dangerous. When too many turn away, the decisions fall into the hands of the few who remain engaged, allowing a small minority to shape the destiny of all. Direct democracy thrives only when participation is strong, when citizens understand that casting a vote is not just a right, but a duty to one another. Its beauty lies in immediacy. the direct connection between will and action. A vote taken today can shape tomorrow, and the transparency of the process create jure. See trust, for nothing is hidden behind closed doors. Yet the very power that makes direct democracy so authentic also makes it volatile. When passions run high, when anger floods the streets or fear grips the people, laws can swing wildly with the tides of emotion. What is celebrated one year can be overturned the next, and stability can give way to turbulence. Direct democracy is not a shield from human flaws. It is a mirror that reflects them with brutal honesty. It shows not only the wisdom of the people, but also their biases, their impatience, and their imperfections. And that is precisely why it is both inspiring and dangerous. To live under direct democracy is to live with an unshakable truth. You cannot sit on the sidelines. Every voice matters, every vote carries weight, and the health of the system depends on the willingness of people to engage with conscience and courage. When guided with thoughtfulness, direct democracy can be the highest expression of freedom, a society truly steering its own fate. But when neglected or ruled by impulse, it can become fragile and unpredictable. It is the closest humanity has ever come to holding its future entirely in its own hands, and it demands not only freedom, but wisdom, vigilance, and responsibility to make it thrive. Representative democracy. Representative democracy is a system built on trust, a trust so profound that people willingly hand their collective voice to chosen individuals, believing these representatives will carry it with honor into the halls of power. At its core, it is still government of the people, but filtered through the leadership they themselves select. Unlike direct democracy, where citizens shape every decision with their own vote, representative democracy acknowledges that the business of governing is vast, complicated, and often requires time, expertise, and negotiation. Citizens entrust their chosen representatives to navigate this complexity on their behalf, to study the details, to weigh competing interests, and to make laws that will serve the greater good. In the act of voting, the people do not surrender their authority. They loan it out, expecting it will return to them in the form of fair policies, just laws, and progress that reflects their voice. This system carries great potential, but also great fragility. When representatives listen closely, remain accountable, and act with integrity, the bond between people and government grows strong. Citizens see themselves reflected in their leaders, and trust flourishes, bringing unity and stability. But when that bond is betrayed, when representatives forget their duty and instead serve their own interests or those of a powerful elite, the entire structure begins to weaken. Betrayal cuts deep because citizens do not feel ignored by strangers. They feel abandoned by the very people they trusted to stand for them. That sense of invisibility breeds disillusionment and anger, which can erode participation and even destabilize the system itself. Representative democracy is therefore not just about elections. It is about constant accountability, a living relationship between the people and their chosen leaders. What makes representative democracy unique is its balance between diversity and unity. A single nation can contain millions of different voices: teachers, farm earners, business owners, laborers, rich and poor alike. And yet, through representation, these voices can be distilled into action. It makes governance manageable, turning a chorus of millions into structured decision-making. It tempers the chaos of constant referendums with the steadiness of elected stewardship. But the danger lies in distance. Citizens may grow detached from their own responsibility, assuming their job is done once the vote is cast. In reality, representation thrives only when citizens stay engaged, watching, questioning, challenging, and holding their leaders accountable. If people stop caring, if they withdraw into apathy, then representatives answer to no one but themselves. The beauty of representative democracy lies in its ability to unite people across vast differences. A farmer in a rural village, a doctor in a crowded city, and a worker in a small town may all be represented in the same chamber, their voices carried into debates that shape the nation. It is a way of weaving together the fabric of a diverse society into something whole. Yet, it is also a reminder that democracy is not a passive gift, it is a partnership. The people choose their guides, and those guides are bound by honor, law, and duty to serve, not to rule. When this partnership holds strong, representative democracy becomes more than a system of governance. It becomes the living heartbeat of a free society, proof that even in complexity, the voice of the people can still shape their future. Republic. A republic is more than just a system of government. It is an idea, a promise, and a safeguard. It is built on the conviction that the authority of a nation should not rest on the whims of a single ruler or the privileges of a select few, but instead be anchored in the rule of law and the consent of the governed. In a republic, the people choose representatives to speak and act on their behalf, but those representatives are bound by laws and principles that stand higher than any one person, no matter how powerful. Unlike a monarchy, where authority flows from birthright, or a dictatorship, where authority is seized by force, a republic declares that leaders are not above the law. They are subject to it, just like the citizens they serve. This creates a foundation where freedom is not granted by rulers, but protected by an enduring framework that outlives them. The true heartbeat of a republic is accountability. Leaders may come and go, but the law remains constant. No office, however high, is beyond question, and no leader is ever greater than the principles that hold the state together. In a republic, power is not a possession. It is a temporary responsibility, entrusted by the people, and meant to be exercised with restraint. Elections become the moment when that trust is renewed or revoked, reminding every leader that their authority comes not from divine right or personal wealth, but from the collective voice of the citizens. Yet, with this power comes responsibility, for a republic can only endure if its citizens remain vigilant. If people grow complacent, if they cease to question and hold leaders accountable, the very safeguards that make a republic strong can be dismantled piece by piece until tyranny slowly creeps back in. What makes a republic distinct is its reliance on principles that outlive personalities. Power is dispersed deliberately across legislatures, courts, and executives, ensuring that no single branch of government can dominate unchecked. This separation of powers is not an accident. It is a defense mechanism against corruption and abuse. By balancing authority, a republic protects freedom while still allowing for effective governance. But this structure depends on the people themselves. A republic assumes that citizens are not passive subjects, but active participants, willing to defend their rights, question authority, and preserve the laws that safeguard their liberty. If the people forget this role, the system falters. There is a quiet dignity to living in a republic. The citizen is not a subject bowing to a monarch, but a stakeholder in a shared experiment. Every vote cast, every law debated, and every right defended is a reminder that the republic belongs not to its leaders but to its people. Yet, like all systems of freedom, it is fragile. It thrives only when its citizens understand that their rights are not gifts handed down by the government, but inheritances they must guard. A republic is not sustained by tradition alone. It is sustained by courage, vigilance, and the collective will of the governed. It is both a privilege and a duty to live in a republic, for within its framework lies the enduring truth. The people are not ruled at the pleasure of the powerful. They are the ultimate rulers, choosing and shaping their destiny through the laws they uphold. Parliamentary Republic. A parliamentary republic is a system that blends the strength of republican principles with the adaptability of parliamentary governance. At its core, it is founded on the rule of law and the consent of the governed, but the heartbeat of its power lies within the legislature, the parliament. Here, the people elect representatives to form the parliament, and from this body emerges the government, led by a prime minister. Unlike a presidential system where the head of state and head of government are fused into one powerful figure, in a parliamentary republic, leadership is fluid, dependent on the confidence of the elected assembly. This makes it both highly responsive and deeply accountable. If the government loses the trust of Parliament, it can be dissolved and new leadership can be formed not through bloodshed or upheaval, but through orderly democratic mechanisms. This structure creates a unique balance. The head of state, often a president, usually serves as a symbolic figure, embodying the unity of the nation, while the prime minister and cabinet handle the day-to-day responsibilities of governance. This division emphasizes the principle that political authority in a parliamentary republic is borrowed, never owned. Leaders are constantly reminded that their legitimacy rests on the support of the assembly and, by extension, the people who elected it. The strength of such a system lies in its flexibility. When a government fails or loses touch with the people, it can be replaced without waiting years for a scheduled election. A vote of no confidence can swiftly bring new leadership. ensuring that the government always reflects the will of the majority in Parliament. This responsiveness gives citizens a sense that power is never too far out of reach, that leaders remain tethered to the collective judgment of their representatives. Yet this closeness between the executive and legislative branches is both a strength and a vulnerability. A parliamentary republic can be remarkably adaptable, but it can also be unstable. Political alliances may fracture, majorities may collapse, and governments may rise and fall with dizzying speed. At times, this volatility creates uncertainty, particularly during crises when steady leadership is most needed. Still, the ability to replace leaders quickly can also prevent prolonged stagnation or corruption, ensuring that those in power are always under scrutiny. The system thrives on debate, negotiation, and compromise, weaving together the perspectives of many voices rather than allowing authority to be concentrated in a single figure. In many ways, the Parliamentary Republic reflects the spirit of democracy at its most alive, messy, noisy, but ultimately self-correcting. It demonstrates that political power is not a crown to be worn indefinitely, but a trust that can be reclaimed when it fails to serve the people. Citizens in such a system are not merely spectators. They are active participants, shaping Parliament through their votes and, indirectly, shaping the government itself. A parliamentary republic is a reminder that governance should never stand still, that leadership is not about permanence, but about responsiveness. It is proof that no government can survive without the confidence of its people, and that no leader, however powerful, can stand above the law or beyond accountability. Presidential Republic. A presidential republic is a bold design of governance that fuses democracy with strong, centralized leadership. In this system, the president stands as both the head of state and the head of government, elected directly by the people rather than appointed by a parliament. This gives the office a unique legitimacy because the president's authority flows straight from the citizens themselves. Unlike in a parliamentary republic, where the prime minister relies on the shifting alliances of a legislature, the president in a presidential republic draws power from a nationwide mandate. This creates a direct bond between leader and people, a connection that can inspire unity, pride, and a sense of personal investment in the nation's direction. One of the greatest strengths of a presidential republic is its clear separation of powers. The system is built around three distinct branches: the legislature, which creates laws, the judiciary, which interprets them, and the executive, led by the president, which enforces them. Each branch exists not only to perform its role, but to check the others, ensuring no single part of the government grows too dominant. In theory, this structure protects against tyranny and guarantees balance. Yet within this balance, the president holds a particularly influential position. As a nationally elected figure, they embody both symbolic leadership and practical authority, capable of steering policies and representing the country on the global stage. In moments of crisis, the nation often turns to this single figure for strength, reassurance, and decisive action. But concentrated authority is a double-edged sword. In the hands of a principled leader, it allows for swift decision-making, clear direction, and the ability to bypass political gridlock that often paralyzes other systems. In the wrong hands, however, it can tip dangerously toward authoritarianism. The very qualities that make a presidential republic effective, its decisive leadership and its centralized executive, can also make it vulnerable to abuse. A president who forgets that their power is borrowed, not owned, can slowly erode the checks and balances, weaken the judiciary, or manipulate the legislature to consolidate personal control. This is why vigilance is crucial. A presidential republic depends not just on laws, but on the integrity of its institutions and the active participation of its citizens. At its best, a presidential republic embodies the spirit of democracy by giving citizens a leader who represents them directly, unfiltered by parliaments or intermediaries. When a president speaks, it is as the voice chosen by millions, a leader whose triumphs and failures are deeply tied to the people who placed them in power. This creates a strong sense of identity and connection, a belief that the leader belongs to the nation and the nation belongs to its people. But this bond comes with responsibility. Citizens must remain watchful, ensuring the president remembers their role is not to rule as a sovereign, but to serve as a steward of the law. Elections become the ultimate moment of accountability, when the people decide whether the president has honored the trust placed in them. A presidential republic thrives when leadership is grounded in humility, when the Constitution is upheld as the highest authority, and when citizens recognize that their power does not end with the ballot. It continues in their vigilance, their voice, and their refusal to let the republic serve anyone but the people themselves. Monarchy. Monarchy is one of the oldest and most enduring forms of governance in human history, a system built on the belief that the fate of an entire nation can rest in the hands of a single family, a single crown, and a single bloodline. Unlike democracy, where power flows upward from the people, monarchy rests on inheritance, tradition, and often the belief in divine will. It is the image of a ruler standing above their people, not because they were chosen by vote, but because they were born into authority. For centuries, kings and queens have embodied more than political leadership. They have served as living symbols of heritage, culture, and national identity. Their presence can outlast governments, revolutions, and political storms, binding generations together through a single figure who seems larger than life. Monarchy has taken many forms throughout history. In its most absolute form, the ruler wields unchallenged power. Their word is law, and their command shapes the destiny of millions without debate or opposition. Decisions in such monarchies could bring stability, but they could also bring ruin, as the lives of entire nations were tied to the wisdom or the recklessness of one individual. In contrast, constitutional monarchies represent a softer, modern adaptation where kings and queens serve primarily as ceremonial figures, while real political authority rests in elected governments. In these systems, the monarch embodies unity and tradition, while day-to-day governance is carried out by representatives of the people. Here, the crown functions less as an instrument of command and more as a cultural anchor, reminding the people of continuity in a world of constant change. To some, monarchy offers a sense of stability and continuity that elected systems cannot always provide. A monarch, untouched by elections or partisan struggles, becomes a steady figurehead, a symbol of national identity who represents everyone regardless of politics. For others, monarchy stands as a glaring reminder of inequality, a system where privilege is not earned through merit or service, but inherited by birth. Critics argue that monarchy perpetuates class divisions, granting wealth and power to those who may never have worked for it, while ordinary citizens struggle for opportunities. History is filled with examples of monarchs who inspired loyalty, courage, and even progress, as well as monarchs who abused their authority, crushing freedoms and dragging nations into darkness. The power of monarchy lies in its symbolism. The crown represents continuity, the passing of history from one generation to the next, a promise that no matter how much the world changes, there will always be a thread connecting the present to the past. Yet this same continuity can be its weakness, for nations locked into hereditary succession cannot choose their rulers and may be left to the mercy of leaders unprepared for the burden they inherit. Monarchy thrives on tradition, ritual, and the deep human desire for order and legacy, but it also exposes how fragile power becomes when it depends on birthright instead of consent. To live under a monarchy is to live under a symbol, sometimes one of unity and pride, sometimes one of oppression and imbalance. It is a reminder that while human societies long for continuity, they also struggle with the dangers of authority that is inherited, not earned. Absolute monarchy. An absolute monarchy is the purest concentration of power in a single individual, a system where the monarch does not merely symbolize authority, but embodies it entirely. In such a realm, the king or queen's word is not only law, it is the very definition of law. No parliament checks their decisions, no court questions their decrees, and no constitution binds their will. All power flows from the throne, and the lives of millions can shift in an instant with the ruler's command. Unlike representative or democratic systems, where authority is shared or distributed, in an absolute monarchy, authority converges at one point, the crown. It is a system where tradition, religion, or the claim of divine right often cloak a ruler's dominance, presenting their power as natural, inevitable, or even sacred. Succession in absolute monarchies is not determined by merit elections or competence, but by bloodline. The crown passes from parent to child, binding entire nations to dynasties whose future may rest on the temperament, wisdom, or folly of a single heir. Some absolute monarchs have viewed this role as a sacred duty, seeing themselves as guardians of their people, protectors of culture, and stewards of the nation's destiny. They shape their kingdoms with care, building institutions, promoting the arts, or guiding their people through times of crisis. Yet history also remembers monarchs who ruled selfishly, treating their nations as personal property, hoarding wealth, and silencing opposition with ruthless force. Under such rulers, the people were not citizens but subjects, living in a world where defiance was not political disagreement, but an act of treason. One of the great appeals of absolute monarchy is its efficiency. Decisions are swift because they do not need debate, compromise, or the slow machinery of democratic processes. In times of war, famine, or crisis, a strong monarch could act quickly to mobilize resources, restore order, or defend the nation. But this same efficiency is all its greatest danger. The fate of the country rests entirely on the character of one person, and history shows how perilous that can be. A wise ruler may bring prosperity, but an impulsive or cruel ruler can plunge the nation into chaos, suffering, or collapse. There are no safeguards, no balancing powers to protect the people when authority lies in one set of hands. Life under an absolute monarchy is both grand and suffocating. Citizens live beneath the shadow of a ruler whose presence is felt in every law, every tax, and every command. Loyalty is not requested but demanded, and obedience is not a choice but a condition of survival. The monarch becomes larger than life, part sovereign, part symbol, part force of destiny. Yet beneath this image lies a fragile truth. No matter how powerful a ruler may seem, their authority always rests on the compliance of those they govern. Once fear fades, once loyalty falters, even the strongest throne can crumble. An absolute monarchy, then, is not just about limitless power. It is about the dangerous gamble of entrusting an entire nation's future to the will, wisdom, and whims of one person. Constitutional monarchy. A constitutional monarchy is a delicate balance between tradition and modern governance, a system where the crown still stands, but its power is no longer absolute. In this form of rule, the monarch exists as a living symbol of heritage, culture, and continuity, while the actual authority to govern rests firmly in the hands of elected leaders and the rule of law. Unlike an absolute monarchy, where the king or queen's command is law, a constitutional monarchy limits the ruler's role to ceremonial duties and symbolic representation. The monarch may open parliament, give speeches, or serve as a figure of unity at national ceremonies, but the decisions that shape everyday life, laws, policies, and governance are carried out by elected officials who answer directly to the people. This system is built on the foundation of a constitution, whether written or unwritten, which serves as the ultimate authority. The Constitution defines not only the rights of the people, but also the boundaries of the monarchy itself. In this way, the monarch becomes less a ruler and more a guardian of tradition, a figure who connects the present to centuries of history without interfering in the democratic process. For citizens, this creates a unique sense of stability. Governments may rise and fall, prime ministers may come and go, but the monarch remains as a steady reminder of national identity, untouched by the chaos of politics. In times of division, the crown can provide a unifying presence, representing the whole nation when elected leaders cannot. Yet, this system carries an unspoken fragility. The survival of a constitutional monarchy depends on restraint. On the monarch knowing that their role is symbolic, not political. Should they overstep into government affairs, they risk undermining the very balance that allows the institution to exist. Similarly, elected heirs must respect the traditions and ceremonial value the monarchy provides, understanding that its presence is not about ruling, but about representing unity. It is a system held together not by force, but by mutual trust. Trust that the monarch will remain above politics, trust that the people will continue to value their symbolic role, and trust that the Constitution itself will safeguard the rights of all. The appeal of a constitutional monarchy lies in its ability to honor the past while embracing the present. It allows a nation to preserve its heritage, the ceremonies, rituals, and symbols that define its identity, without surrendering its political future to hereditary power. Citizens live under both a crown and a constitution, one representing history and tradition, the other ensuring freedom and equality. But this duality requires constant vigilance. If the monarchy grows too detached, it risks irrelevance. If the people lose faith in the balance of tradition and democracy, the crown may fade into history altogether. In its best form, however, a constitutional monarchy becomes a living institution, flexible, enduring, and symbolic of a nation's ability to blend legacy with progress. It is not power that keeps it alive, but the belief of the people who see in the monarch a reflection of their story, their culture, and their shared continuity across generations. Elective monarchy. An elective monarchy is one of the rarest and most fascinating blends of governance in history, sitting between the permanence of hereditary rule and the fluidity of democracy. Unlike an absolute or constitutional monarchy, where the crown is passed down through bloodlines, in an elective monarchy, the ruler is chosen through a process of selection or election. This system tries to capture the stability and symbolism of monarchy, while introducing the idea that leadership should not always be bound to birthright. Instead, kings or queens rise to the throne through the decision of nobles, clergy, or in some cases, even the people themselves. The strength of this system lies in its flexibility, by making succession a matter of choice rather than inheritance. An elective monarchy allows a nation to place capable or respected figures on the throne, instead of being forced to accept a ruler who may be unprepared, unfit, or unwilling. In theory, this creates an advantage. The kingdom is not left to the fate of dynasties alone, but can select leaders based on merit, wisdom, or political necessity. It allows the monarchy to remain an active force in governance while giving society a degree of control over who wears the crown. In practice, however, elective monarchies often struggled with tension. Elections, far from being smooth, were often battles of influence, with powerful families, religious leaders, or foreign powers trying to sway the outcome. Instead of preventing conflict, the choice of a new monarch could spark rivalries, conspiracies, and wars of succession. History provides striking examples. The Holy Roman Empire functioned as an elective monarchy, where emperors were chosen by a group of prince-electors. Similarly, in Poland's past, kings were selected by the nobility, a system that created moments of promise but also instability. The very act of choosing a monarch often led to factionalism, with competing interests tearing at the unity of the nation. While the idea was to select the best leader, too often it became a game of power, corruption, and foreign meddling. Unlike a hereditary system, where succession was automatic, elective monarchies sometimes left thrones vacant, or sparked internal struggles that weakened the state. Yet despite these flaws, the concept of elective monarchy remains deeply symbolic. It represents humanity's attempt to merge tradition with choice, to combine the continuity of monarchy with the accountability of selection. Citizens living under such a system could look to their monarch as both a figure of legacy and, in theory, someone who had been chosen rather than merely born to rule. This gave the crown a different kind of legitimacy, one rooted not just in heritage, but in decision. The true legacy of elective monarchy is a lesson in balance. It shows the enduring appeal of monarchy as a symbol of unity, but also the growing human desire to have a say in who leads them. While the system often collapsed under the weight of politics, rivalries, and corruption, it paved the way for modern ideas of governance, where leadership is earned, not inherited, and where legitimacy comes from the act of being chosen. Elective monarchy stands as a reminder that even in eras dominated by dynasties, people still hungered for choice, for a ruler who reflected not just tradition, but the will of those they served. Oligarchy. An oligarchy is a system where power is not spread across an entire population, nor concentrated in a single monarch or dictator, but instead controlled by a small, privileged group. The very word comes from the Greek roots meaning rule of the few. In an oligarchy, this few can be defined in many ways, by wealth, family connections, military strength, or even intellectual standing. But what unites them is exclusivity. Authority is reserved for a select circle, and those outside that circle often find themselves without influence over the direction of their own society. On the surface, an oligarchy may appear orderly and stable. Decisions are made efficiently because they do not need to pass through long debates or be approved by millions of voices. But beneath this appearance of stability lies inequality. In an oligarchy, the interests of the ruling class often outweigh the needs of the majority. Laws, policies, and systems are designed to protect the elite, ensuring their continued dominance while keeping others in positions of dependence. This creates a divide between rulers and the ruled that can grow into resentment, unrest, or even revolution. For the everyday citizen, living under an oligarchy often means watching opportunities slip away while a privileged minority dictates the nation's future. History is filled with examples of oligarchies. Ancient Sparta was governed by a small group of military leaders, while the Venetian Republic was steered by a wealthy merchant class. In modern times, oligarchic tendencies appear when economic elites or powerful corporations hold undue influence over political systems, shaping policies to benefit themselves rather than society at large. Oligarchy does not always declare itself openly. It can exist quietly within other systems, hidden beneath the language of democracy or republics. When campaign financing, lobbying, or corruption allows a few wealthy individuals to dominate the political process, the system may look democratic on the outside, but function oligarchically within. The danger of oligarchy lies not just in inequality, but in stagnation. When only a few voices are heard, innovation and progress slow, and society begins to reflect the narrow vision of its rulers. The dreams and ideas of the wider population are excluded, leaving nations trapped in systems designed only to serve a small elite. Yet, oligarchies endure because they benefit those in power, who will often use wealth, propaganda, or force to maintain their position. Breaking free requires extraordinary effort, for the system is designed to protect itself. And yet, oligarchy also carries a lesson. It reminds us what happens when the voices of the many are silenced in favor of the few. It is a warning against complacency in democratic systems, showing how easily concentrated wealth or influence can erode true equality. While it may promise order and efficiency, it does so at the cost of fairness and freedom. In the end, an oligarchy is not simply about rule by the few, it is about the exclusion of the many, and it is this exclusion that makes it both powerful and dangerous. Aristocracy. Aristocracy is a system of rule where authority rests in the hands of a privileged class, often tied to nobility, wealth, or inherited status. The very word comes from the Greek roots meaning rule of the best, but in practice, aristocracy has often been less about the truly best qualified and more about those born into advantage. Aristocrats were historically landowners, nobles, or elite families who claimed superiority not only in wealth, but in culture, education, and refinement. They saw themselves as guardians of tradition, claiming that their position in society gave them the wisdom to govern better than the common people. In their eyes, aristocracy was not domination, it was stewardship, the responsibility of the enlightened few to guide the masses. At its idealized core, aristocracy was supposed to elevate leadership above the chaos of populism or the greed of tyranny. Its defenders argued that the aristocrats, trained from birth in politics, philosophy, and governance, were uniquely qualified to make decisions for the good of society. By removing power from the hands of the impulsive majority, aristocracy claimed to preserve order and stability. This was the argument of Plato himself, who suggested that the wisest and most virtuous should lead. But history has shown that aristocracy rarely lived up to this noble vision. Instead, it often hardened into an exclusive class system, where privilege was passed down like property, regardless of merit or wisdom. The so-called rule of the best too often became rule of the few, sustained by inherited power rather than proven ability. In societies dominated by aristocracy, the gap between rulers and ruled was vast. Aristocrats enjoyed wealth, land, and influence, while ordinary citizens worked under systems designed to preserve the elite's status. Laws and traditions reinforced this divide, making upward mobility nearly impossible. Yet aristocracy was not always brutal. At times, it provided stability, patronage of the arts, and preservation of cultural identity. Many great works of architecture, literature, and philosophy were funded by aristocrats who saw themselves as custodians of civilization. But even this cultural contribution often came at the cost of inequality, as the privileges of the few overshadowed the struggles of the many. The weakness of aristocracy lies in its rigidity. By tying leadership to birthright, it ignores the talents and potential of countless individuals outside the noble class. A brilliant thinker, a capable leader, or an inspired reformer born among commoners could find themselves locked out of power entirely. Over time, this exclusion breeds resentment. Revolutions have toppled aristocracies across the world, from France to Russia, fueled by the anger of people who no longer accepted that a small class should dictate their fate. Aristocracy teaches a powerful lesson. Even systems that claim to elevate the best can decay when privilege replaces merit, and when rulers cling to power for themselves rather than serving the people. In the end, aristocracy reflects humanity's struggle between hierarchy and equality, tradition and change. It is both alluring and dangerous, a reminder that leadership tied to class and privilege may promise refinement, but without accountability, it inevitably drifts toward exploitation. Its history shows that when power is kept in the hands of a chosen few, the voices of the many are silenced, and eventually those voices rise to demand their place in shaping the destiny of their nation. Plutocracy. A plutocracy is a system of rule where wealth is the ticket to power, and money becomes the true language of authority. The very word comes from the Greek roots meaning rule of the rich, and that is exactly what it represents. A society where those with great fortunes hold the reins of government, shaping laws, policies, and even culture to serve their interests. In a plutocracy, the power of the vote is often overshadowed by the power of the coin. Those with wealth do not simply live more comfortably, they live with influence, able to bend systems in their favor while the majority is left struggling to be heard. What makes plutocracy particularly dangerous is that it rarely announces itself openly. Unlike monarchies or dictatorships, which wear their structures visibly, plutocracy often hides beneath the surface of democratic systems. It may call itself a republic, a democracy, or a free state, but if the wealthy dominate the political process through campaign funding, lobbying, or control of media, then the system quietly becomes one where money decides more than the people's voice. The rich can amplify their interests to such a degree that the needs of ordinary citizens are drowned out, making equality before the law an illusion rather than a reality. This silent dominance is what makes plutocracy insidious. It thrives not in the open, but in the shadows of influence. History provides many examples. Ancient Rome, in its later years, was dominated by wealthy elites whose wealth allowed them to control both politics and the military. In modern times, plutocratic tendencies can be seen wherever corporations, billionaires, or financial institutions hold disproportionate sway over governments. When legislation favors big business at the expense of workers, when economic inequality grows so vast that opportunity becomes a privilege instead of a right, society begins to resemble a plutocracy, even if it still wears the mask of democracy. This is why some argue that plutocracy is not just a form of government, but a disease that can infect other systems, eroding their fairness from within. For the ordinary person, life in a plutocracy can feel suffocating. No matter how hard one works, the system seems rigged to protect the wealthy few. Laws favor those who already have power, opportunities are locked behind walls of privilege, and social mobility becomes a fading dream. The wealthy, meanwhile, justify their dominance by claiming that their success proves their superiority, that their wealth makes them naturally more capable of guiding society. Yet this belief ignores a fundamental truth. Leadership should be built on service and vision, not on the size of one's bank account. Plutocracy serves as a stark warning. It shows how fragile freedom and equality can be when money holds too much sway over politics. It reveals that democracy is not destroyed only by coups or dictators, but also by unchecked inequality and the quiet corruption of influence. A plutocracy may look like freedom from the outside, but inside it is a prison where opportunity is reserved for the wealthy, and where power is traded in gold rather than in trust. Its lesson is clear. When money rules, justice falters, and when justice falters, society itself begins to decay. Technocracy. A technocracy is a system where power rests not in kings, generals, or wealthy elites, but in experts. It is government by knowledge, by those who specialize in science, engineering, economics, or technology. The central belief of technocracy is that society can be run more efficiently and more fairly if decisions are placed in the hands of those who truly understand the systems that drive modern life. Instead of politicians shaped by popularity or rhetoric, technocracy elevates specialists whose authority comes from skill, data, and expertise. In theory, this creates a government less driven by ideology and more focused on results, one that values evidence, reason, and technical solutions over political games. The appeal of technocracy is obvious in an age where the world's problems are increasingly complex. Climate change, energy crises, economic systems, digital security. These are not issues that can be solved with slogans or speeches. They require knowledge, long-term vision, and practical solutions. Technocracy promises to cut through the noise of politics by letting experts design policies with precision, free from the pressures of short election cycles or partisan conflict. To its supporters, this makes technocracy more rational and efficient than traditional democracies, where decisions are often swayed by emotions, campaigns, or the need to win votes rather than solve real problems. But technocracy has its weaknesses. By placing authority in the hands of experts, it risks alienating the very people it claims to serve. Governance is not only about efficiency, it is also about values, identity, and shared human experience. Experts may know how to design a system, but they cannot always decide what the system should serve. A society governed only by specialists can become cold, mechanical, and disconnected from the everyday struggles of ordinary people. In such a system, citizens may feel voiceless, reduced to data points in a grand equation rather than human beings with hopes, fears, and unique needs. Without accountability to the public, even the most knowledgeable experts can grow arrogant, believing they know better than the people whose lives their decisions affect. History shows glimpses of technocracy at work. In times of crisis, nations often turn to experts, engineers to rebuild after disasters, economists to stabilize collapsing systems, scientists to guide health policies. Some governments even weave technocratic elements into their structures, appointing non-political specialists to oversee crucial ministries. But technocracy on its own has rarely thrived as a complete system of governance. The balance between expertise and democracy is difficult to maintain. When experts dominate completely, society loses its sense of participation and choice. When politics overwhelms expertise, progress slows under the weight of rhetoric and ideology. The lesson of technocracy is that knowledge alone is not enough to govern. It must be combined with accountability, empathy, and the voice of the people. A government run solely by experts may solve technical problems, but it cannot address the deeper human questions of justice, meaning, and belonging. Technocracy represents humanity's desire to solve its problems with intelligence, but it also reminds us that wisdom does not lie only in expertise. It lies in the collective experience of society itself. The challenge, then, is not to replace democracy with technocracy, but to weave the strengths of both, creating a system that listens to the people while learning from those who understand the complexities of the modern world. Theocracy. A theocracy is a system where political power and religious authority are fused into one. In this form of governance, leaders do not rule in their own name, but in the name of a higher power. The laws of the land are drawn not from constitutions written by human hands, but from sacred texts, divine commandments, or interpretations of religious doctrine. In a theocracy, rulers often claim legitimacy not through elections or inheritance, but through the belief that they are chosen by God, guided by faith, or entrusted with protecting the spiritual purity of the nation. To its followers, this creates a sense of unity, where politics, morality, and religion are no longer separate realms, but part of one seamless order. The strength of a theocracy lies in its ability to create cohesion. When an entire society shares the same faith, grounding governance in that faith can build a powerful sense of identity and purpose. Citizens may see their government not just as an authority, but as a sacred mission, one that defends their beliefs and aligns earthly life with spiritual destiny. In times of uncertainty, theocracy can offer clarity, presenting divine will as the ultimate guide. Leaders are not simply lawmakers. They are seen as guardians of the soul, ensuring that society remains faithful and obedient to higher truths. This gives theocracy a unique emotional and spiritual weight that no secular system can replicate. Yet, theocracy also carries profound dangers. By tying governance to a single faith, it risks excluding, oppressing, or silencing those who do not share the same beliefs. In a theocracy, dissent is not merely political. It can be treated as blasphemy, rebellion against divine order. This gives rulers immense power, for they can frame opposition not as disagreement, but as sin. The merging of faith and politics often strips citizens of the right to question authority, since to question the government is to question God. Over time, this concentration of both spiritual and temporal power can suffocate freedom, stifle diversity, and transform religion from a source of comfort into a tool of control. History is full of examples where theocracies shaped entire civilizations. Ancient Egypt's pharaohs ruled as both kings and divine figures, blending political and religious power seamlessly. In medieval Europe, the church wielded immense authority, influencing monarchs and shaping laws through its spiritual dominance. In modern times, nations with theocratic elements still exist, where laws are based directly on religious texts, and leaders claim to uphold divine authority above all. While such systems can provide unity to the faithful, they often leave little room for pluralism, personal freedom, or the recognition of differing beliefs. Theocracy's lesson is that faith, while powerful and deeply personal, becomes complicated when fused with governance. Religion can inspire compassion, justice, and unity, but when it is wielded as political power, it can just as easily be used to suppress, divide, and dominate. A theocracy may claim to bring heaven to earth, but in practice it often struggles with the same flaws as any human system: corruption, inequality, and the abuse of power. Its danger lies in the illusion of infallibility. When leaders cloak themselves in divine authority, they make themselves immune to accountability. And without accountability, no system, no matter how sacred, can truly serve its people. Ecclesiocracy. An ecclesiocracy is a form of rule where religious institutions themselves hold direct political authority. Unlike a theocracy, where rulers may claim divine guidance or rule in the name of God, an ecclesiocracy places power explicitly in the hands of priests, clerics, or religious leaders. In this system, the state and the church are not simply connected, they are one and the same. Decisions about law, governance, and policy are made by religious institutions, and the authority of the clergy extends beyond the temple or mosque into every corner of civil life. Here, spiritual leaders are also political rulers, and their religious office gives them the power to shape the nation's destiny. The defining feature of an ecclesiocracy is institutional control. The laws of the land are drawn directly from religious texts, and the interpretation of those texts lies in the hands of clerical leaders. In such societies, the church or religious council often becomes the supreme authority, deciding not only matters of faith, but also matters of state. Citizens are expected to live according to religious law, and violations are treated not merely as crimes, but as moral or spiritual failings. This creates a system where religion does not simply inspire politics, it dictates it. The appeal of ecclesiocracy lies in the unity it promises. When a society is deeply religious and its people share a common faith, merging governance with spiritual leadership can create a sense of purpose and harmony. People may feel that their leaders are not motivated by personal ambition or political gain, but by sacred duty. To the faithful, this can make the system feel pure, noble, and divinely protected. It ensures that religious values are preserved in every aspect of life, from family laws to education to justice. In times of moral crisis, ecclesiocracy offers the certainty of spiritual authorities as a guiding force. Yet, this unity comes at a cost. By giving religious leaders complete control, an ecclesiocracy often silences diversity of thought and belief. Minority religions, alternative philosophies, and even differing interpretations within the same faith are suppressed. Freedom of speech and personal choice become dangerous because they may challenge the authority of the clergy. The blending of spiritual and political authority also makes accountability difficult. Leaders can present their decisions as divinely inspired, making it nearly impossible to question or resist them. As a result, corruption can flourish under the protection of sacred legitimacy, and ordinary citizens may feel powerless against rulers who claim to act on behalf of God. History offers vivid examples of ecclesiocracy. In some medieval societies, the church dominated kings and nobles, setting laws and deciding disputes. In certain modern states, religious councils still hold ultimate authority over political institutions, shaping policies and enforcing laws rooted directly in Scripture. These systems reveal both the strength and weakness of ecclesiocracy. its ability to unify and preserve faith, and its tendency to exclude and control. The lesson of ecclesiocracy is clear. Religion can be a powerful source of inspiration, guiding people toward compassion, justice, and meaning. But when religion becomes government itself, it risks turning faith into a tool of dominance. An ecclesiocracy may present itself as the voice of the divine, but like any human system, it is vulnerable to abuse. Its danger lies in the merging of two forms of authority, spiritual and political, without allowing space for accountability or dissent. It reminds us that faith can elevate the soul, but when fused with unchecked power, it can also chain it. Autocracy. An autocracy is the rule of one person who holds absolute and unchecked authority over an entire nation. In this system, power is not distributed among representatives, institutions, or the people. It is concentrated entirely in a single leader whose word becomes law. Unlike monarchies that rely on hereditary succession or democracies that depend on elections, an autocracy can arise through force, manipulation, or the collapse of other governing systems. What defines it is the absence of limits. The autocrat decides the direction of the state, often without consultation, opposition, or accountability. To live under autocracy is to live under the shadow of one figure whose decisions shape every aspect of society. The appeal of autocracy lies in its simplicity and speed. With no debates, parliaments, or courts standing in the way, decisions are made instantly. In times of crisis, this can appear efficient. A strong leader can mobilize armies, rebuild infrastructure, or stabilize economies with a speed that slower, more divided systems cannot match. Supporters of autocracy often point to this decisiveness as a strength, arguing that one powerful leader can accomplish more than years of political wrangling in a democracy. For citizens weary of chaos, corruption, or indecision, an autocrat can seem like a savior, a figure who promises order and stability in exchange for loyalty, but efficiency comes at a cost. Without checks and balances, an autocrat's authority can easily slide into tyranny. What begins as decisive leadership can turn into oppressive rule, where dissent is silenced, freedoms are stripped away, and fear replaces trust as the foundation of governance. In an autocracy, citizens are often reduced to subjects whose only role is obedience. Justice becomes fragile, because laws serve not the people, but the ruler's interests. Even if an autocrat gnaws with noble intentions, the absence of accountability creates an environment where power is easily abused. History is filled with examples of autocrats who began as reformers but turned into dictators, consumed by the very authority they wielded. Life under an autocracy can feel both predictable and suffocating. On one hand, people may experience stability, as the ruler maintains strict order and eliminates opposition. On the other hand, that same stability often comes at the expense of freedom, creativity, and progress. Citizens may hesitate to speak, innovate, or challenge norms for fear of punishment. The autocrat's personality and worldview shape the entire nation, meaning that the fate of millions rests on the character of one individual. If the leader is wise, the nation may prosper. If they are cruel or reckless, the nation may collapse. This fragility makes autocracy one of the riskiest systems of governance, because so much depends on a single, fallible human being. Autocracy's greatest lesson is about balance and the danger of unchecked authority. It demonstrates how power, when concentrated in one person, can create both order and oppression. It appeals to humanity's desire for stability, but often destroys the very freedoms that make life meaningful. At its core, autocracy is a gamble, placing the destiny of a nation in the hands of one leader and hoping that they will wield their power wisely. History shows that such gambles rarely end well, for no one person, no matter how strong or intelligent, can carry the weight of a people's future alone. Dictatorship. A dictatorship is one of the most forceful and uncompromising forms of governance, where absolute authority is seized and maintained by a single leader or a small ruling group. Unlike monarchies, which often justify power through heritage, or democracies, which rely on elections, dictatorships are usually born from force, through coups, revolutions, or the collapse of other systems. A dictator rises above institutions and rules with unchecked control, often using fear, propaganda, and military power to silence opposition. In this system, the leader's will is the nation's command, and dissent is not a right but a crime. Dictatorships often present themselves as saviors in times of chaos. A dictator may step in during war, economic collapse, or political instability, promising to restore order and protect the nation from enemies within and without. At first, some citizens may welcome this strong leadership, mistaking control for stability. But, once power is consolidated, dictators rarely give it up. They eliminate rivals, dismantle democratic institutions, and rewrite laws to ensure their dominance. Over time, the system shifts from emergency rule into permanent oppression, where the dictator's grip tightens until the entire nation is bound to their authority. Life under dictatorship is often marked by fear. Citizens learn to measure their words, guard their thoughts, and watch their actions carefully, knowing that disagreement with the regime can lead to prison, exile, or even death. Propaganda becomes a weapon, shaping reality itself to glorify the leader and erase opposition. Media, education, and culture are tightly controlled to ensure that only one narrative, the dictator's narrative, reaches the people. In this way, dictatorship does not only dominate bodies, but also seeks to dominate minds. Ordinary citizens may outwardly conform while secretly longing for freedom, but the risks of resistance keep many silent. Yet dictatorships reveal something about human societies. The desire for order can sometimes overpower the desire for liberty. In times of crisis, people may trade freedom for security, allowing dictators to rise. But history shows that such bargains are dangerous. A dictator may bring temporary stability, but in the long run, the absence of accountability breeds corruption, cruelty, and stagnation. The nation becomes hostage to one person's ambitions, and progress is sacrificed to protect their throne. Even the most powerful dictators eventually face downfall, because a rule built on fear cannot last forever. The lesson of dictatorship is stark. It warns us how fragile freedom can be, and how quickly a people's voice can be silenced if they surrender too much power to one individual. It reminds us that leadership without accountability becomes tyranny, and that no nation is safe when its destiny rests entirely in the hands of one person. A dictatorship may claim to bring strength, but in truth it weakens the soul of society, replacing trust with fear and freedom with obedience. Military dictatorship. A military dictatorship is a system where the armed forces seize control of the state, and generals or officers become the ultimate rulers of a nation. Unlike civilian dictatorships that rise through politics or monarchies based on inheritance, a military dictatorship emerges from the power of weapons. Tanks replace ballots, soldiers replace politicians, and the chain of command becomes the structure of government. The military claims authority not because it was chosen by the people, but because it has the strength to enforce its rule. Military dictatorships often begin in moments of national crisis, civil wars, political chaos, corruption, or economic collapse. The military steps in under the banner of restoring order, presenting itself as the only disciplined force capable of saving the nation. At first, some citizens may even welcome their intervention, seeing the army as a stabilizing power compared to weak or corrupt civilian leaders. But once the military takes power, it rarely relinquishes it. Generals declare martial law, dissolve parliaments, and suspend constitutions, ruling directly through force rather than through consent. Life under a military dictatorship is shaped by fear and strict control. Civil liberties are often stripped away, as freedom of speech, protest, and political opposition are treated as threats to national security. Military courts replace civilian justice, and anyone who dares to challenge the regime can face imprisonment, torture, or disappearance. Propaganda paints the military as heroic defenders of the nation, while critics are branded as enemies or traitors. Even daily life is influenced by the presence of soldiers, checkpoints, and surveillance, reminding citizens that power rests in the hands of armed men, not elected representatives. The military's rigid structure becomes both its strength and weakness. Discipline and order allow it to impose authority quickly, but governance is not the same as war. Running a nation requires compromise, compassion, and vision, qualities that military rulers often lack. Decisions are made through command, not dialogue, and policies are designed to maintain control rather than improve society. Over time, this leads to stagnation, corruption within the military elite, and growing resentment among the people. What began as a promise of stability often ends in repression, economic decline, or violent rebellion. History offers countless examples, from Latin America to Africa to Asia, where military dictatorships rose, held power for decades, and eventually collapsed under the weight of their own brutality. They reveal a recurring truth. No matter how powerful the guns, a nation cannot be governed by force alone. People may be silenced for a time, but the hunger for freedom eventually breaks through. The lesson of military dictatorship is one of warning. It shows how fragile civilian governance can be when corruption and instability erode trust, and how easily the military can step in under the guise of saviors. But it also reminds us that true strength does not come from weapons. It comes from legitimacy, justice, and the trust of the people. A military dictatorship may control through fear, but it cannot inspire loyalty. And without loyalty, no regime can endure forever. Authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is a system of governance where power is concentrated in the hands of a single leader or a small ruling group, and where individual freedoms are heavily restricted. Unlike democracy, where authority is shared and citizens have a voice, authoritarian systems demand obedience and conformity. The government dictates political life, controls public discourse, and suppresses opposition, often using fear, censorship, and surveillance to maintain control. At its core, authoritarianism is not about serving the people, but about controlling them, ensuring that the ruling authority remains unquestioned. The appeal of authoritarianism often lies in the promise of stability. In times of social unrest, economic crisis, or political chaos, authoritarian leaders present themselves as strong figures who can restore order quickly. They offer decisive leadership, free from the messiness of debate and elections. To citizens exhausted by disorder, this can feel like a relief. But this stability comes at a heavy price: freedom. In an authoritarian state, citizens lose the right to openly criticize the government, organize protests, or demand change. Instead, the system thrives on silence, where obedience is rewarded and dissent is punished. One of the defining traits of authoritarianism is its use of control. Authoritarian governments rely on censorship to shape narratives, restricting the media so that only the state's perspective is heard. Surveillance becomes a weapon, with citizens constantly watched to discourage resistance. Political opposition is often crushed, parties dissolved, activists imprisoned, and critics silenced. In such a society, fear becomes a constant presence, and people learn to hide their true thoughts behind masks of compliance. The public space shrinks until citizens exist not as participants in governance, but as subjects of authority. History shows countless examples of authoritarianism, both past and present, from emperors who demanded unquestioned loyalty to modern regimes that monitor every word and action. Authoritarian systems have proven resilient because of their ability to suppress resistance. Yet they are also fragile, because their power rests not on legitimacy but on fear. Once fear begins to crumble, once citizens realize they outnumber their oppressors, authoritarian systems face collapse. This is why authoritarian leaders often double down on repression, believing that survival depends on silencing every possible spark of dissent. The danger of authoritarianism lies in its gradual nature. It rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it creeps in step by step. Rights are restricted slowly, media becomes biased quietly, opposition is weakened subtly, until one day, freedom has vanished almost unnoticed. By the time people realize what has been lost, the system has already entrenched itself. This is why authoritarianism serves as a warning. Freedom is fragile, and vigilance is necessary to protect it. In the end, authoritarianism is a trade, a promise of order in exchange for liberty. But history proves that such a trade always favors the rulers, not the people. A society may gain short-term stability, but at the cost of silenced voices, suppressed individuality, and the erosion of human dignity. Authoritarianism teaches us that true strength in governance does not come from fear or control, but from trust, accountability, and the ability to let people speak, choose, and live freely. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is the most extreme form of authoritarian control, a system where the state seeks not only to govern people's actions, but to dominate their very thoughts, beliefs, and identities. Unlike ordinary dictatorships, which aim to control political power, totalitarian regimes attempt to reshape society itself. The government extends its reach into every corner of life: politics, education, art, religion, even private conversations. In such a system, individuality is crushed, and the state becomes the only truth, the only voice, and the only power. Citizens are not merely governed, they are molded to serve the vision of the ruling authority. The strength of totalitarianism lies in its total grip on society. Leaders in these regimes do not settle for obedience. They demand loyalty, devotion, and worship. Propaganda becomes a weapon more powerful than armies, saturating media, schools, and culture with the regime's ideology. Children are taught from a young age to honor the state, citizens are required to echo its slogans, and even art and literature are controlled to serve its agenda. In a totalitarian system, there is no neutral ground. Every act, every word, and every belief must align with the state's vision. But this strength is built on fear and surveillance. Totalitarian governments rely on secret police, informants, and mass monitoring to ensure that no dissent survives. Even private life is not safe, as neighbors, co-workers, and even family members may report one another for disloyalty. Citizens learn to guard their words carefully, living double lives, outwardly loyal, inwardly afraid. In this climate, truth itself becomes fragile. Facts can be rewritten, history can be erased, and reality itself can be reshaped by the ruling regime's propaganda. To live under totalitarianism is to live in a world where the state controls not only the present but also the memory of the past. History offers chilling examples of totalitarianism, from the fascist regimes of the 20th century to communist states that demanded complete ideological conformity. These systems showed how devastating total control can be. In such regimes, opposition was not just suppressed, it was annihilated. Millions were imprisoned, silenced, or killed in the name of building a perfect society. Yet perfection never arrived. Instead, totalitarianism left behind fear, suffering, and the erasure of individuality. It showed that when a government seeks to control every aspect of life, it inevitably destroys the very essence of humanity. The lesson of totalitarianism is one of warning and vigilance. It demonstrates how power, when unchecked, can grow into something that does not just rule people, but consumes them. It reminds us that freedom is not simply the ability to vote or speak. It is the right to think, to dream, and to live without fear of surveillance or punishment. Totalitarianism strips away that freedom completely, leaving only obedience in its place. At its heart, totalitarianism is not just about political control. It is about erasing individuality and replacing it with uniformity. It thrives on fear and loyalty, but collapses under the weight of human resistance. Because no system, no matter how powerful, can forever suppress the human spirit's desire for freedom. It is a stark reminder of how dangerous unchecked power can be, and why protecting liberty, diversity, and truth is essential for any society that hopes to endure. Despotism. Despotism is a system of rule where a single leader wields absolute power, unchecked and unchallenged, often ruling with cruelty or arrogance. The word itself comes from the Greek despotes, meaning master or lord, and in many ways, despotism is the embodiment of domination. A despot does not merely govern, they command, treating their subjects less as citizens and more as possessions. Unlike monarchies, which may be bound by tradition or religion, or dictatorships that rely heavily on military strength, despotism is defined by the complete subordination of the people to the will of one ruler. The despot is the law, the voice, and the authority, demanding obedience not through legitimacy but through fear. What makes despotism unique is its deeply personal nature. While other authoritarian systems may rely on institutions, parties, or councils, despotism is centered entirely on the ruler themselves. Every decision flows from their desires, every law bends to their will, and every subject is expected to serve their interests. This creates a fragile but terrifying system. Fragile because it rests on the whims of one person, but terrifying because there are no limits to their control. A benevolent despot may bring stability, reforms, or even prosperity, but a cruel despot can plunge entire nations into suffering with a single decree. Life under despotism is therefore unpredictable, shaped not by justice or principles, but by the moods and ambitions of the ruler. For ordinary people, despotism often means the loss of dignity and freedom. There is no room for dissent, no possibility of opposition, and no guarantee of fairness. The despot rules above the law, so the law itself becomes a weapon to protect their power and punish their enemies. Citizens may live in constant fear, never sure if today's loyalty will protect them from tomorrow's wrath. This climate of uncertainty destroys trust, not only in government but also between neighbors, as survival often requires silence or complicity. In such a world, people stop thinking about justice or rights and instead focus only on survival under the shadow of absolute rule. History is filled with examples of despotic rulers. Ancient empires, medieval kingdoms, and even modern states have fallen into despotism, where leaders treated nations as their personal property. Some despots justified their power through divine right, claiming they ruled by the will of the gods, while others ruled through brute force and fear. No matter the justification, the result was the same: a society where one individual's power outweighed the lives and voices of millions. While some despots may have achieved stability or even progress, most are remembered for oppression, corruption, and the suffering of their people. The danger of despotism lies in its lack of accountability. With no limits, no checks, and no counterbalance, despotism feeds the human tendency toward corruption and abuse. Even if a despot begins with noble intentions, absolute power has a way of eroding compassion and amplifying ego. Over time, the ruler becomes isolated from the people, surrounded only by those who fear or flatter them. This isolation deepens the gap between the governed and the governor, leaving the nation vulnerable to decline, rebellion, or collapse once the despot's power weakens. The lesson of despotism is simple yet profound. Unchecked power, when concentrated in the hands of one person, inevitably corrupts. It may promise order, but it delivers fear. It may claim strength, but it breeds fragility, for a society built on obedience to one ruler is only as stable as that ruler's reign. Despotism stands as a warning throughout history, a reminder that when power is absolute, freedom dies, and when freedom dies, the human and spirit cannot flourish. Kleptocracy. A kleptocracy is a government where corruption is not the exception but the foundation. The word itself means rule by thieves, and that is precisely what it is. A system where those in power exploit their positions to enrich themselves at the expense of the people. In a kleptocracy, public office is not seen as a responsibility to serve, but as an opportunity to steal. Leaders loot state resources, drain national wealth, and funnel money into their own accounts, while ordinary citizens are left with poverty, broken infrastructure, and shattered trust. The essence of a kleptocracy is greed. Unlike dictatorships that may justify their power through strength, or monarchies that rely on tradition, kleptocracies thrive on corruption hidden beneath a thin veil of legitimacy. Leaders may present themselves as protectors of the nation, but behind the scenes, they siphon wealth through bribes, embezzlement, and manipulation of state contracts. Laws are written not to protect citizens, but to protect thieves. Institutions like the police, courts, and parliaments are not guardians of justice. They become tools used to silence critics and shield the ruling elite. In such a system, the government itself turns into a criminal enterprise. Life under kleptocracy is a bitter cycle of suffering. Public funds that should be spent on schools, hospitals, and infrastructure are instead hoarded by the ruling elite. Roads remain unpaved, hospitals crumble, and opportunities disappear, while leaders live in luxury, surrounded by wealth that the people will never see. Citizens may pay heavy taxes, but their contributions are stolen rather than reinvested. Over time, this erodes the very foundation of society. Trust in government collapses, institutions lose credibility, and hope is replaced by resentment. The poor become poorer, and the rich become untouchable. History offers clear examples of kleptocracy. Leaders who ruled for decades while amassing billions in personal wealth, regimes that drained entire economies into the pockets of a few, and governments that left their nations bankrupt while their elites lived in unimaginable luxury. Often these regimes hide their crimes behind propaganda, claiming to be working for the people while secretly bleeding the country dry. In some cases, kleptocrats even use foreign banks, secret accounts, or offshore companies to hide their stolen riches, ensuring that wealth leaves the country while citizens are left behind in misery. The danger of kleptocracy is not just economic, it is moral and social. It teaches citizens that corruption is normal, that justice can be bought, and that honesty has no place in governance. Over time, this mindset seeps into every level of society. When leaders steal, others follow their example, and corruption spreads like a disease. Trust between government and people is destroyed, and the idea of a fair, just society becomes impossible. The lesson of kleptocracy is that corruption at the top poisons everything below. A nation cannot grow when its wealth is stolen, and a people cannot thrive when their leaders see them only as a resource to exploit. While kleptocracy may allow rulers to live in luxury for a time, it always leaves behind ruin, ruined institutions, ruined economies, and ruined lives. It is one of the most destructive forms of governance, not because it rules by fear or ideology, but because it feeds on greed, draining the lifeblood of a nation until nothing remains but ashes and anger. Stratocracy. A stratocracy is a system of government where the military is not just an influence on politics, it is the government itself. Unlike a military dictatorship, which usually arises when the armed forces overthrow civilian rule, a stratocracy is built into the structure of the state from the beginning. In this system, governance and military power are inseparable. The leaders of the nation are its generals and officers, and the chain of command of the armed forces becomes the framework through which laws are made and enforced. The state is run like a permanent barracks, where discipline, hierarchy, and obedience shape the entire society. The defining feature of a stratocracy is legitimacy through service. Leaders are not chosen through popular elections or inherited dynasties, but through rank, merit, and military achievement. Authority is earned on the battlefield, or through loyalty to the military institution itself. In some versions, even citizenship is tied to military service. Only those who serve in the armed forces are granted the full rights of participation in governance. This creates a system where the army is not merely a protector of the state, it is the state, and the distinction between civilian and soldier disappears. Life in a stratocracy is marked by order, but also by rigidity. The values of military life, discipline, duty, loyalty, and sacrifice, are elevated to the highest ideals of society. On one hand, this can create stability and efficiency. Crime may be low, infrastructure may be well organized, and citizens may feel protected by the strength of their government. On the other hand, such a system often leaves little room for personal freedom, creativity, or dissent. The same strict obedience required of soldiers is expected of ordinary people, turning society into a disciplined machine where individuality is sacrificed for collective order. History provides glimpses of stratocracy in action. Ancient Sparta is perhaps the most famous example, where the entire state was structured around military training and warfare. Citizenship was tied to one's role as a soldier, and society revolved around preparing for battle. In modern times, elements of stratocracy appear in regimes where military service is required for political participation, or where generals hold institutionalized political power without needing to overthrow anyone. Unlike temporary military juntas, stratocracies are designed to last, embedding the military as the natural and permanent ruling class. The danger of stratocracy lies in its narrow vision of society. A nation is more than an army. It is made of families, workers, artists, thinkers, and dreamers. By placing the military at the center of governance, stratocracy risks reducing all aspects of life to questions of discipline and defense. Culture, education, and innovation may suffer under the weight of militarization, as everything is seen through the lens of strategy and control. Citizens may feel safe, but they may also feel suffocated, unable to live beyond the strict roles assigned to them. The lesson of stratocracy is that strength and discipline alone cannot sustain a society. Armies can defend nations, but they cannot nurture the soul of a people. A government built entirely on military values may bring order, but it often does so at the cost of freedom, creativity, and compassion. Stratocracy stands as both a model of discipline and a warning of imbalance, showing us what happens when the sword replaces the pen, and when soldiers become not just defenders of the state, but masters of it. Timocracy. A timocracy is a form of government where political power is tied directly to property, wealth, or honor. The The word comes from the Greek time, meaning value or honor, and in its purest sense, a timocracy is a system where only those who own land, possess wealth, or demonstrate a certain social standing are allowed to govern. It is not rule by all, as in democracy, nor rule by one, as in monarchy, but rule by those deemed worthy according to material or social standards. At its core, timocracy suggests that responsibility for the state should belong to those who have the most to lose, landowners, the wealthy, or individuals of honor. The roots of timocracy can be traced back to ancient Greece, particularly in the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. Plato described timocracy as a stage of government that arises when honor and ambition take priority over wisdom. In his view, a timocracy is driven by the values of warriors and landowners, citizens motivated by pride, strength, and the pursuit of recognition. Aristotle, on the other hand, saw timocracy as a system where only property owners could participate in politics, because they were considered more invested in the stability of society. Both perspectives highlight the same theme. Power belongs not to all, but to those considered valuable through wealth or honor. Life under a timocracy reflects this principle of exclusion. Citizenship becomes conditional, and rights are not universal. The poor, the landless, or those without recognized honor are denied a voice in governance. Laws and policies are shaped to protect the interests of the property-owning class, often at the expense of those without privilege. On the surface, this can create stability, as leaders are deeply tied to the prosperity of the state. But beneath that stability lies inequality, where the voices of many are silenced so that the few may govern. The appeal of timocracy lies in its sense of responsibility and order. Supporters argue that those with property or wealth are less likely to act recklessly, since they have more at stake in the nation's success. A landowner, for example, might be more motivated to maintain peace and stability because war or chaos would threaten their livelihood. In theory, this makes governance more cautious and responsible. Yet, the danger is clear. When political participation is limited to the privileged, society becomes divided, and injustice grows. The wealthy may use their power not to serve the nation, but to protect and expand their own status. History has seen many timocratic elements woven into larger systems. In ancient Athens, for example, political participation was once restricted to property-owning men. In early Rome, higher offices were available only to those of certain social classes. Even in more recent centuries, voting rights were often tied to land ownership or wealth, excluding the majority from political life. Though many societies have moved toward universal suffrage, echoes of timocracy still linger wherever economic power translates directly into political influence. The lesson of timocracy is about the tension between wealth, responsibility, and justice. While it may seem reasonable to give more power to those with greater material investment in society, such a system inevitably excludes the majority and fosters inequality. It elevates property over people, honor over fairness, and wealth over wisdom. In the end, a timocracy may create order, but it does so by silencing the voices of the many and concentrating power in the hands of the privileged few. It reminds us that true governance must be rooted not only in responsibility, but also in inclusivity, because a society cannot truly thrive when only some are allowed to be heard. Geniocracy. A geniocracy is a system of government built on the idea that intelligence, creativity, and wisdom, not wealth, birthright, or force, should determine who rules. The word itself comes from genius, suggesting that only the most intellectually capable individuals should lead society. Unlike democracies, where power rests in the hands of the majority, or aristocracies, where it belongs to a privileged class, Geniocracy argues that leadership should be entrusted to those whose minds are best equipped to solve complex problems and guide humanity forward. It is a vision of governance designed not around equality of voice, but around excellence of thought. At the heart of Geniocracy is the belief that intelligence is the most valuable resource in society. Supporters argue that many of the world's greatest challenges, climate change, poverty, technological ethics, war, are too complex to be solved by popularity contests or inherited authority. Instead, they demand leaders who can think critically, innovate, and see beyond short-term gain. In a geniocracy, elections or selections would not be based on charisma or wealth, but on demonstrated intellectual ability and problem-solving skills. Citizens themselves might also need to meet a minimum threshold of education or intelligence to participate in voting, ensuring that decisions are informed and not driven by ignorance or manipulation. The appeal of geniocracy is clear. Imagine a government where policies are not shaped by corruption, propaganda, or emotional rhetoric, but by reason, evidence, and vision. Leaders chosen for their brilliance could craft long-term strategies, anticipate future crises, and design solutions with precision. For societies frustrated by short-sighted politics, endless corruption, and the sway of money in elections, the promise of rule by the intelligent feels like a dream, a way to place humanity's destiny in the hands of those most capable of safeguarding it. But geniocracy also carries profound risks. By elevating intelligence as the ultimate standard of worth, it risks creating a system of exclusion where millions are stripped of their voice. Who decides what counts as intelligence? Is it measured by tests, education, or achievements? If only the gifted can govern, then society risks devaluing compassion, lived experience, and moral character, qualities that are just as important in leadership as intellect. Furthermore, intelligence alone does not guarantee justice. History is full of brilliant minds who use their intellect for manipulation, cruelty, or selfish ambition. Without accountability, even a government of geniuses can fall into arrogance and abuse. Geniocracy also raises deep ethical questions. Should governance belong to the few who are smarter, or should it remain shared by all, even if imperfectly? While intelligence is valuable, reducing leadership to a measure of intellect risks turning society into a hierarchy where human worth is judged by mental ability alone. This could marginalize those with less education, different ways of thinking, or disabilities, undermining equality and dignity in the pursuit of brilliance. The lesson of geniocracy is complex. It challenges us to think about what qualities truly make a good leader. Intelligence, yes, but also empathy, humility, and fairness. It reminds us that while brilliance can guide society toward progress, governance is not only about solving problems, it is also about representing people in all their diversity, struggles, and imperfections. A geniocracy imagines a future led by the wise, but it risks forgetting that wisdom is not found only in intellect. It is also found in compassion, justice, and the shared experiences of humanity. Kritarchy. A kritarchy is a form of government where judges hold supreme authority, and justice itself becomes the foundation of rule. The word comes from the Greek krites, meaning judge, and unlike democracies, monarchies, or dictatorships, a kritarchy is defined by the primacy of legal interpretation. In this system, political power is not held by kings or parliaments, but by courts. The judges, interpreting laws or sacred traditions, govern society by ensuring that all decisions flow from legal rulings rather than from popular will or executive command. The defining characteristic of a kritarchy is the rule of law elevated above all else. Judges are not merely interpreters of justice. They are the rulers themselves. Their authority extends beyond settling disputes into shaping the direction of the state. Policies are decided in courtrooms rather than parliaments, and legislation is enforced not by elected representatives, but by legal decrees. For citizens, this means that society operates as an ongoing trial, where the measure of life is constantly weighed against legal and moral codes. One of the earliest examples of a kritarchy can be found in ancient Israel during the period of the Judges. Before kings ruled, leaders known as judges held both judicial and political authority, guiding the people through decisions based on divine law and communal justice. Their power did not come from elections or armies, but from their wisdom, reputation, and ability to apply sacred law. In a sense, kritarchy is a system that blurs the line between governance and judgment, merging the role of leader and judge into one. The appeal of a kritarchy lies in its promise of fairness and order. By placing judges at the center of governance, it suggests that decisions will be based on impartial law rather than on personal ambition, wealth, or military might. Ideally, this creates a society where everyone is held accountable under the same standards, and justice becomes the guiding principle of life. For people living in times of corruption or tyranny, The idea of being ruled by law instead of men can feel like a path toward balance and equality. Yet, like all systems, Kritarchy has its weaknesses. Laws are not always perfect, and judges, being human, are not immune to bias or corruption. When judges hold supreme power, their interpretations can become absolute, leaving no room for dissent or democratic input. A Kritarchy can easily slide into rigidity, where tradition and precedent dominate progress. Moreover, when governance is left solely in the hands of judges, the dynamic and creative aspects of leadership, vision, innovation, and adaptability, may be neglected. Justice alone cannot build roads, lead armies, or inspire societies. The lesson of Kritarchy is about the importance of balance between justice and governance. It reminds us that laws are essential to protect fairness and equality, but they must work alongside broader forms of leadership to truly sustain a society. A government of judges may protect order, but it risks ignoring the diversity of human needs and the value of collective participation. Kritarchy shows us the power of law as a guiding force, but it also warns against allowing justice to become so rigid that it overshadows freedom, compassion, and growth. Noocracy. A noocracy is a system of governance where wisdom, intellect, and reason are the supreme guiding forces of society. The term comes from the Greek nous, meaning mind, or intellect, and kratos, meaning rule. In essence, a noocracy is the rule of the wise, where decisions are made not by the majority, the wealthy, or the powerful, but by those who embody higher understanding and deep knowledge. It is a vision of governance that places intelligence and moral wisdom above all other qualifications, imagining a society led not by ambition or force, but by enlightened thought. The concept of noocracy has philosophical roots. Plato, in his work The Republic, envisioned something close to a noocracy when he proposed that philosopher kings should rule the state. In his view, only those who truly understand justice, truth, and the greater good are fit to govern. Unlike Geniocracy, which focuses more on intellectual capacity and problem-solving, Noocracy emphasizes wisdom and moral clarity, the ability to see beyond self-interest and act for the long-term well-being of society. Leaders in a noocracy are not simply smart, they are enlightened, guided by principles of truth, harmony, and ethical responsibility. Life under a noocracy, at least in theory, is built around reason and fairness. Laws and policies are shaped by deep philosophical understanding, rather than by fleeting emotions or the pressures of popularity. In such a society, justice is not reduced to the desires of the majority or the power of the elite, but is rooted in universal principles of wisdom. Citizens may feel a sense of trust, knowing their leaders are chosen for their moral clarity and ability to think beyond personal gain. A noocracy seeks not just to govern, but to elevate humanity, pushing society toward higher ideals. But the vision of noocracy, while inspiring, carries challenges. Wisdom is nous. Haute, easy to measure, and deciding who counts as the wise risks exclusion and elitism. How do we ensure that those in power are truly guided by wisdom and not simply by intellectual arrogance or manipulation? A noocracy could easily become a mask for another form of oligarchy, where a select group claims superiority and silences others. Furthermore, wisdom, though powerful, is not infallible. Philosophers and thinkers may see deeper truths, but they too are human, subject to error, pride, and bias. History has seen echoes of noocracy in certain religious, philosophical, or merit-based systems, where leaders were chosen for their knowledge and moral standing. Yet, full noocracies have rarely existed in practice, because wisdom is difficult to institutionalize. Still, the idea continues to inspire thinkers who imagine a future where humanity is guided by knowledge and moral insight rather than greed, ignorance, or brute power. The lesson of noocracy is profound. It challenges us to ask what qualities we truly value in leadership. Do we want rulers who are popular, wealthy, or strong, or do we want leaders who are wise enough to guide humanity with vision and compassion? A noocracy reminds us that the ultimate purpose of governance should not just be survival or power, but the pursuit of truth, justice, and higher human flourishing. While it may be an ideal rather than a reality, it points to a truth we often forget. Societies thrive not when they are ruled by the loudest voices, but when they are led by the wisest minds. Demarchy. Demarchy is a form of government where leaders are not elected by vote or appointed by inheritance but are chosen randomly, usually by a process of lottery. The word comes from the Greek demos, the people, and archy, rule, meaning rule of the people by lot. In this system, political power is distributed through chance rather than wealth, popularity, or military strength. Unlike democracy, where the majority decides, or aristocracy, where the privileged lead, Demarchy entrusts governance to ordinary citizens, selected at random to represent the population. The idea behind Demarchy is rooted in fairness and equality. By using random selection, the system eliminates the corruption of money in politics, the manipulation of media, and the dominance of elites. Every citizen, regardless of status, has an equal chance of participating in government. In theory, this creates a more genuine representation of society, where leaders are everyday people rather than professional politicians. The chosen individuals serve for a limited time, then return to normal life, preventing the rise of entrenched power. Demarchy has historical precedent. In ancient Athens, one of the birthplaces of democracy, many public officials were selected by lot rather than by election. This practice was seen as a safeguard against corruption and factionalism, ensuring that no single group could monopolize power. By removing the influence of wealth and charisma, Athens sought to keep politics closer to the people themselves. Modern thinkers have revived the idea, proposing that random selection could be used for citizen assemblies or decision-making bodies to reduce polarization and increase fairness in governance. Life under a demarchy would look very different from the systems we know today. Leaders would not campaign, promise, or manipulate. They would simply be selected, like drawing names first. Rome, a hat. This means leadership could fall on anyone: teachers, farmers, doctors, artists, or workers. While this may sound risky, it also means government decisions would be made by individuals who directly live the struggles and experiences of ordinary life. Governance becomes less about maintaining political careers and more about genuine service to the community. But demarchy is not without challenges. Random selection does not guarantee competence, and some chosen leaders might lack the skills, knowledge, or experience to govern effectively. While training or advisory councils could help, critics argue that randomness risks instability and poor decision-making. Additionally, people may resist being chosen, unwilling to abandon their personal lives for political duty. The balance between fairness and effectiveness becomes the central question. Can random governance truly manage the complexities of modern society? The lesson of demarchy is both inspiring and cautionary. It reminds us that politics is often dominated by elites, money, and manipulation, and that alternative systems can break this cycle. By trusting ordinary citizens, demarchy reaffirms the idea that governance belongs to everyone, not just the powerful few. Yet it also shows us the difficulty of translating fairness into effective leadership. In the end, demarchy challenges us to rethink what representation truly means, whether it is better to be ruled by those who seek power or by those who never asked for it at all. Meritocracy. Meritocracy is a system of governance where power and leadership are granted to those who demonstrate talent, skill, and achievement, rather than wealth, birthright, or sheer force. The word comes from merit, meaning worthiness or earned ability, and in theory, a meritocracy ensures that those who rise to positions of authority are the most capable, not the most privileged. Unlike aristocracy, where status is inherited, or democracy, where popularity often determines leadership, meritocracy is designed to reward excellence and hard work. It paints a vision of a fair society where opportunities are open to all, but success is earned by ability. The core appeal of meritocracy lies in its promise of fairness. It suggests that anyone, regardless of background, can reach the highest levels of leadership if they prove themselves worthy. In such a system, education, innovation, and personal achievement become the stepping stones to power. Supporters argue that this ensures the most competent people make the decisions, leading to stronger governance, better problem-solving, and a more efficient society. When those in power earn their positions through skill and effort, it inspires trust that leadership is based not on privilege, but on true capability. In practice, meritocracy often ties advancement to measurable achievements, academic success, professional accomplishments, or demonstrated leadership. For example, Those who excel in certain fields may be elevated into positions of governance, with the belief that their proven ability translates into good leadership. In this sense, meritocracy is not only a political system, but also a cultural value, influencing how societies reward individuals in education, employment, and status. Many modern societies claim to be meritocratic, where hard work pays off, and talent is the currency of success. However, meritocracy has its hidden flaws. While it promises fairness, it often overlooks the unequal starting points of different individuals. Not everyone has access to the same education, resources, or opportunities to showcase their talent. As a result, those already privileged may find it easier to rise, while others struggle to compete despite equal or greater potential. A society claiming to be meritocratic can sometimes disguise inequality, pretending that success is based purely on merit when, in reality, hidden advantages play a decisive role. Another danger of meritocracy is arrogance. When people believe they earned their position solely through ability, they may look down on others as less deserving, forgetting the role of luck, opportunity, and support in their success. Leaders chosen through meritocracy may become detached, seeing themselves as superior rather than as servants of the people. This mindset can foster elitism, where those at the top justify inequality by claiming they alone are talented or hardworking enough to deserve power. The lesson of meritocracy is twofold. On one hand, it encourages excellence, rewarding those who strive to learn, grow, and achieve. It reminds us that leadership should be earned, not inherited or bought. On the other hand, it warns us not to confuse merit with privilege, or to assume that talent alone guarantees fairness. A true meritocracy can only exist when opportunities are genuinely equal, and when those who rise to power use their abilities not to elevate themselves above others, but to uplift the entire community. At its best, meritocracy is a vision of justice and efficiency, where the most capable minds and hands guide society forward. At its worst, it becomes a mask for inequality, where the successful claim superiority while ignoring the struggles of those left behind. It is a system that asks us to balance talent with humility, achievement with compassion, and to remember that true leadership is not only about earning power, it is about using it wisely for the good of all. Federalism is a system of government where power is divided between a central authority and smaller political units, such as states, provinces, or regions. Unlike a unitary system, where all power is concentrated in one central government, federalism spreads authority across multiple levels, creating a balance between unity and local independence. At its core, federalism is built on the idea that governance should reflect both the needs of the whole nation and the unique identities of its individual parts. It is a system that recognizes diversity not as a weakness, but as a strength. The beauty of federalism lies in its balance. The central government handles matters that affect the nation as a whole, such as defense, currency, and foreign policy, while regional governments manage local issues like education, transportation, and cultural affairs. This dual structure allows communities to maintain their traditions, values, and autonomy while still benefiting from being part of a larger nation. In this way, federalism is both a union and a partnership, weaving together different regions into one fabric while allowing each piece to retain its distinct pattern. One of the greatest advantages of federalism is flexibility. In a diverse country with many languages, religions, and cultures, federalism prevents one central authority from imposing uniform rules on everyone. It allows local governments to craft policies that suit their own populations, whether it's in matters of education, healthcare, or law. This makes federalism particularly valuable in large, multicultural nations, where trying to govern from a single center would risk alienating or suppressing minority groups. History provides clear examples of federalism in action. The United States is perhaps the most famous federal system, where power is shared between the federal government and the states, similarly, countries like India, Germany, and Canada rely on federal structures to manage vast territories and diverse populations. Each shows how federalism can promote unity without erasing local identities, and how shared power can create stability by preventing any single authority from becoming too dominant. But federalism also brings challenges. Dividing power between central and local governments can create conflict over authority. Disagreements may arise about which level of government has the right to make certain decisions, leading to legal battles or political gridlock. Furthermore, differences between regions can sometimes grow so strong that they threaten national unity, as local identities clash with national identity. Federalism requires constant negotiation, cooperation, and compromise to prevent division from turning into fragmentation. The lesson of federalism is about balance between unity and diversity, central strength, and local independence. It reminds us that governance is not one-size-fits-all, and that people's needs are shaped by the places they live, the cultures they inherit, and the challenges they face. Federalism offers a model for respecting those differences while still binding people together under a shared framework. At its best, federalism creates harmony between the national and the local, ensuring that no voice is too distant to be heard. At its worst, it can deepen divisions if leaders fail to cooperate. Yet, its enduring presence in many of the world's strongest nations shows that federalism is more than a system of governance. It is a philosophy of coexistence, a recognition that unity is not the absence of difference, but the ability to thrive within it. Unitary State. A unitary state is a system of government where all political power is concentrated in a single central authority. Unlike federalism, which divides authority between national and regional governments, a unitary state places sovereignty firmly in the hands of the central government, with local governments existing only as extensions of its will. In this structure, the capital becomes the beating heart of the nation, issuing laws, policies, and decisions that apply uniformly across the entire country. The defining feature of a unitary state is uniformity. All citizens, no matter where they live, are subject to the same laws and policies, crafted by a single authority. Local governments may exist, but their powers are granted and can be revoked by the central government. This ensures a strong sense of national unity and coherence. Instead of regions pursuing their own agendas, the state speaks with one voice, projecting stability and clarity both domestically and internationally. The appeal of a unitary system lies in its simplicity. With all decisions made at the top, governance is straightforward, efficient, and consistent. Citizens across the country receive the same rights, services, and regulations, reducing the risk of regional inequality. For smaller nations or countries with a relatively homogeneous culture, this model prevents fragmentation and strengthens national identity. It is particularly effective in times of crisis, when quick, centralized decisions are necessary to guide the entire nation. History and modern politics provide many examples of unitary states. France, for instance, has long been known for its highly centralized governance, with decisions traditionally flowing from Paris to the rest of the country. The United Kingdom, despite granting devolved powers to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, is still constitutionally a unitary state. Many other countries around the world, both large and small, use this system to maintain cohesion and control. Yet the very strength of the unitary state can also become its weakness. Concentrating power in one place risks alienating regions with distinct identities, languages, or traditions. Local needs may be ignored in favor of national priorities, leading to resentment and a sense of exclusion. If the central government becomes corrupt, incompetent, or oppressive, the entire nation suffers, as there are no strong regional authorities to provide balance. In the absence of local autonomy, people may feel distant from their rulers, disconnected from decisions that directly shape their daily lives. The lesson of the unitary state is about the tension between unity and diversity. It shows how centralization can create strength, clarity, and order, but also how it can silence local voices and concentrate too much power in too few hands. A unitary system can provide stability, but only if it remains flexible enough to recognize the different needs of its people. At its best, the unitary state ensures equality and national cohesion, preventing divisions from weakening the nation. At its worst, it becomes a tool for overreach, where the center dictates without listening, and unity is maintained not through shared identity, but through control. It reminds us that, while a strong center can hold a nation together, a healthy society requires space for local voices to breathe. A confederation is a system of government where independent states or regions come together to form a loose union, bound by agreements of cooperation, but retaining their own sovereignty. Unlike a federation, where power is shared between a central government and local authorities, In a confederation, the balance tilts heavily toward the member states. The central authority exists, but its powers are weak, limited to only what the states agree to give. At its heart, a confederation is not about unity through strength, but about partnership built on voluntary association. The defining feature of a confederation is autonomy. Each member state keeps its independence, controlling its own laws, economy, and military, while delegating only certain responsibilities, such as defense, trade, or diplomacy, to the central body. The Union acts as a forum for cooperation rather than as a sovereign government, ensuring that no member loses its identity or freedom. In this way, a confederation values independence above uniformity, creating a fragile but deliberate balance between self-rule and shared purpose. History offers notable examples of confederations. The Articles of Confederation in the early United States created a loose alliance of the 13 colonies, where the Central Congress had little power compared to the states. Similarly, the Swiss Confederation began as a pact of independent cantons agreeing to mutual defense and cooperation. These examples show the appeal of confederation. It allows small or diverse regions to join forces without giving up their independence, creating unity without imposing control. The strength of a confederation lies in its flexibility. States are free to govern themselves according to their own traditions, cultures, and needs while enjoying the benefits of collective security and cooperation. This can be particularly valuable in regions where diversity is great or where distrust of central authority runs deep. Confederation provides a way for communities to collaborate without surrendering their autonomy, offering a middle path between total independence and complete unification. Yet, the very weakness of the central authority can also become its downfall. Without strong powers, the central government may struggle to enforce decisions, manage crises, or prevent disputes between member states. Cooperation relies heavily on trust and goodwill, and if states put their own interests first, the union can quickly fall apart. Confederations often face challenges in maintaining unity during times of war, economic hardship, or political disagreement, as the lack of central authority makes decisive action difficult. The lesson of confederation is about the delicate balance between freedom and strength. It shows that unity is possible without complete surrender, but also that too much independence can weaken the whole. Confederations remind us that cooperation must be built on trust and shared vision, not just on paper agreements. They work best when members are committed to the common good, but they falter when self-interest outweighs loyalty to the union. At its best, a confederation is a model of partnership, where diverse states come together to face shared challenges while preserving their unique identities. At its worst, it becomes a fragile alliance, unable to act when unity is most needed. Confederation stands as both an inspiring and cautionary example, proof that freedom and cooperation can coexist, but also a reminder that without true commitment, even the strongest bonds can unravel. Parliamentary system. A parliamentary system is a form of government where the executive branch draws its legitimacy from the legislature, usually called parliament, and is directly accountable to it. Unlike a presidential system, where the executive and legislature are separate and independent, in a parliamentary system the two are closely intertwined. The head of government, often called the Prime Minister, is not elected directly by the people, but is chosen from the elected members of Parliament, typically the leader of the majority party or coalition. This creates a system where the executive exists because of, and only so long as it maintains, the confidence of Parliament. The defining feature of a parliamentary system is its emphasis on cooperation and accountability between branches of government. Since the executive emerges from the legislature, the Prime Minister and Cabinet remain deeply connected to the representatives of the people. If Parliament loses confidence in their leadership, it can dissolve the government through a vote of no confidence, forcing new elections. This ensures that the executive remains constantly tied to parliamentary approval, making the government more responsive to the will of elected representatives and, by extension, the people. One of the great strengths of the parliamentary system is flexibility. If a government becomes ineffective, unpopular, or corrupt, Parliament can replace it without waiting for the next scheduled election. This creates adaptability and allows for quicker adjustments to political realities. Additionally, because the executive and legislature work closely together, the passage of laws and policies is often smoother, avoiding the deadlock that can plague systems where the two branches are separate and opposed. History and practice show many successful parliamentary systems. The United Kingdom is perhaps the most bumps example, where the Prime Minister leads the government while remaining a member of Parliament. Other nations such as Canada, India, Australia, and many European countries follow similar structures, adapting the parliamentary model to their own traditions and needs. These examples highlight how the system can provide stability, continuity, and effective governance in diverse societies. Yet, the parliamentary system is not without its challenges. Its reliance on majority rule means that minority voices can sometimes be overshadowed, especially in systems dominated by large parties. Coalition governments, formed when no single party wins a majority, can lead to fragile alliances where compromises water down policies or constant disagreements destabilize governance. Additionally, the lack of a clear separation between executive and legislative branches can sometimes blur accountability, as both sides are deeply interconnected. The lesson of the parliamentary system is about the importance of accountability and responsiveness. It demonstrates that governments must maintain the trust of the people's representatives or risk being replaced. At its best, this creates a system where leaders are constantly aware of their responsibility to Parliament and, ultimately, to the citizens. At its worst, it can produce instability through frequent elections or weak coalitions, leaving governance in a constant state of flux. Parliamentary systems remind us that leadership is not permanent but conditional, dependent on maintaining trust and delivering results. They are systems that value cooperation, dialogue, and adaptability, showing that governance can be strong not by standing apart from the people's representatives, but by being inseparably bound to them. Presidential system. A presidential system is a form of government where the head of state and the head of government are the same person, known as the president. Unlike a parliamentary system, where executive power comes from the legislature, in a presidential system the executive branch is separate and independent. The president is directly elected by the people, not chosen by parliament, and holds significant authority over both domestic governance and foreign affairs. This creates a system where the leader embodies both symbolic and practical power, serving as the face of the nation while also directing the machinery of government. The defining feature of the presidential system is the separation of powers. The executive, legislature, and judiciary are distinct branches, each designed to check and balance the others. The president cannot dissolve parliament, and parliament cannot directly remove the president except through extraordinary measures like impeachment. This creates a government with strong safeguards against abuse of power, ensuring that no single branch dominates the others. In theory, this balance fosters stability and accountability, with each institution playing a clear and independent role. One of the greatest strengths of the presidential system is stability in leadership. Since presidents are elected for fixed terms, governments are less likely to collapse due to parliamentary disputes or shifting coalitions. This gives citizens clarity and consistency in governance, as they know who their leader will be for a set period of time. The direct election of the president also strengthens legitimacy, as the people themselves choose their leader, rather than leaving the decision to legislators or party negotiations. Examples of presidential systems are found across the world, with the United States being the most prominent model. In this system, the president wields significant power, but is limited by constitutional checks, such as congressional oversight and judicial review. Other nations, particularly in Latin America, also use presidential systems, though the balance of power between branches often varies. The presidential model has influenced many countries seeking a strong executive balanced by institutional safeguards. Yet, the presidential system is not without its flaws. The very separation of powers that prevents domination can also lead to gridlock, especially when the president and the legislature are controlled by opposing parties. Laws may stall, policies may stagnate, and government can become paralyzed by conflict between branches. Additionally, the concentration of symbolic and executive power in a single figure can create the risk of authoritarian drift, especially if constitutional limits are ignored or weakened. In fragile democracies, this risk can be particularly dangerous. The lesson of the presidential system is about balance. the need for strong leadership coupled with strong safeguards. It shows that while direct election and fixed terms can empower citizens and provide stability, power must always be checked by institutions that prevent abuse. At its best, the presidential system combines clarity, accountability, and stability, giving citizens a leader they choose while ensuring no branch becomes supreme. At its worst, it can become a battleground of gridlock or a pathway to authoritarian rule. The presidential system reminds us that leadership is not just about who governs, but how they are restrained. It demonstrates the importance of clear boundaries, mutual accountability, and the delicate balance between authority and freedom. Semi-presidential system. A semi-presidential system is a unique blend of both parliamentary and presidential models of governance. In this system, power is shared between a president, who is usually elected directly by the people, and a prime minister, who is appointed from parliament. Unlike a purely presidential system, where the president dominates, or a purely parliamentary system, where the prime minister leads, the semi-presidential structure divides authority between two executive figures. This creates a balance where leadership is both anchored in the direct will of the people and shaped by the legislature's confidence. The defining feature of the semi-presidential system is this dual executive. The president often serves as the head of state, overseeing foreign policy, defense, and national strategy, while the prime minister acts as head of government, managing domestic affairs and the daily running of the state. In times of harmony, this partnership can be effective, combining the stability of a president with the adaptability of a parliament-backed prime minister. But in times of conflict, especially when the president and prime minister come from different political parties, the system can become strained, with competing visions for leadership. The appeal of a semi-presidential system lies in its balance. By giving citizens the power to directly elect a president, it ensures that the nation has a leader with broad legitimacy. At the same time, the presence of a prime minister, accountable to parliament, keeps executive power more flexible and responsive to shifting political realities. This combination offers stability without rigidity, allowing the system to adapt to crises or changes in public opinion more easily than purely presidential systems. Examples of semi-presidential systems can be found in countries like France, Russia, and several nations in Afars, IK, and Eastern Europe. France, in particular, provides a model where the president sets long-term direction while the prime minister handles domestic policy. When both offices are aligned politically, governance is smooth and efficient. When they are divided, known as cohabitation, the government must learn to share power carefully, with Parliament often acting as the mediator between competing agendas. Yet, the semi-presidential system is not without its challenges. The division of power, while flexible, can also create confusion. Citizens may struggle to know who truly leads, and authority can become muddled when the president and prime minister disagree. This duality can breed instability, as political gridlock and rivalry between executives slow down decision-making. In weaker democracies, the president may attempt to overshadow or dominate the prime minister, eroding the balance and tilting the system toward authoritarianism. The lesson of the semi-presidential system is about partnership. It demonstrates that power can be shared, divided, and balanced to reflect both popular will and parliamentary accountability. At its best, it offers stability and adaptability, ensuring that leadership reflects both the voice of the people and the shifting dynamics of the legislature. At its worst, it becomes a stage for conflict, with two leaders pulling the nation in opposite directions. The semi-presidential system reminds us that governance is not only about institutions, but about relationships between leaders, between branches, and between the people and their rulers. When cooperation and balance are maintained, it can be one of the most resilient systems. When rivalry and distrust prevail, it can unravel, leaving the nation caught between divided centers of power. Capitalist state. A capitalist state is a form of governance where the political structure supports and protects a capitalist economic system, one built on private ownership, free markets, and competition. In such a state, the role of government is not to control production directly, but to create and enforce the conditions in which capitalism can thrive. This usually means protecting private property, enforcing contracts, regulating trade, and ensuring the legal framework that allows businesses and individuals to compete freely in the marketplace. The defining feature of a capitalist state is its focus on economic freedom. Individuals and companies have the right to own property, start businesses, trade goods, and accumulate wealth. The government acts as a referee rather than a player, stepping in to maintain order, ensure fair play, and occasionally regulate excesses, but generally avoiding direct ownership or control of industries. This system believes that when individuals pursue their own economic interests, society as a whole benefits through innovation, efficiency, and growth. The appeal of a capitalist state lies in opportunity. It encourages ambition, creativity, and innovation by rewarding those who take risks and succeed. Citizens are free to build wealth, climb social ladders, and shape their futures through personal effort. The promise of upward mobility makes capitalism attractive to many, as it offers the hope that talent and hard work can lead to success, regardless of one's starting point. Governments in capitalist states often emphasize policies that encourage entrepreneurship, investment, and global trade, believing these drive prosperity. Examples of capitalist states can be seen in many modern nations, particularly in Western countries. The United States, for instance, has long championed capitalism as both an economic model and a political philosophy. Other countries like Japan, South Korea, and much of Europe also practice variations of capitalist governance, blending free markets with varying levels of regulation and social safety nets. Each example shows how states adapt capitalism to their unique cultures and histories while maintaining its central principle, the priority of private ownership and market freedom. Yet, capitalist states also face deep challenges. Economic freedom often creates inequality, as those with resources and opportunities rise faster than those without. Wealth can concentrate in the hands of a few, leading to oligarchies where money influences politics and erodes fairness. Left unchecked, capitalism can breed exploitation, where workers, resources, and even the environment are sacrificed for profit. Governments in capitalist states must constantly balance freedom with regulation, ensuring that the pursuit of wealth does not destroy justice, equality, or sustainability. The lesson of the capitalist state is about balance. It shows that while free markets can drive innovation and prosperity, they must be tempered by rules that protect fairness and dignity. Capitalist states thrive when they combine economic freedom with safeguards that prevent exploitation, ensuring that opportunity does not become privilege for only a few. At their best, they empower individuals to dream, create, and succeed. At their worst, they turn society into a battlefield of inequality, where the wealthy rule and the poor are left behind. The capitalist state reminds us that governance and economics are inseparable. The state cannot simply step aside and let markets run freely. It must shape, guide, and protect. True freedom in capitalism is not the absence of rules, but the presence of fair ones that give everyone a chance to compete. Socialist state. A socialist state is a form of governance where the government plays a central role in controlling or managing the economy, with the aim of reducing inequality and ensuring that resources are distributed more fairly among the population. Unlike a capitalist state, where private ownership and free markets dominate, a socialist state emphasizes collective ownership, state planning, and the principle that wealth should serve the common good rather than concentrate in the hands of a few. The foundation of this system rests on the idea that society functions best when cooperation, not competition, drives progress. The defining feature of a socialist state is economic centralization. Industries, resources, and services, such as healthcare, transportation, or energy, are often owned or heavily regulated by the state. This ensures that essential needs are met not according to profit, but according to public welfare. Instead of markets deciding prices and production, the government often takes on that responsibility, aiming to prevent exploitation, stabilize society, and guarantee equal access to basic necessities. In this way, a socialist state seeks to align governance with social justice, creating systems that serve everyone rather than rewarding only the powerful or wealthy. The appeal of a socialist state lies in its promise of fairness. It envisions a society where no one is left behind, where education, healthcare, and housing are not privileges but rights. By redistributing wealth and controlling industries, it seeks to protect vulnerable groups and reduce the gap between rich and poor. Supporters argue that this model creates stronger social bonds, where individuals are not just competitors in an economic race, but members of a community working toward collective prosperity. Examples of socialist states vary across history and the world. Nations like Cuba and the former Soviet Union practiced versions of socialism with heavy central planning, while modern countries like China and Vietnam blend socialism with elements of market economics. Meanwhile, countries such as Sweden or Norway, though not fully socialist, adopt socialist-inspired policies like universal health care, free education, and strong welfare systems, showing how elements of socialism can coexist with democracy and capitalism. Yet, the socialist state faces significant challenges. Centralized control can sometimes stifle innovation, as individuals and businesses lose the incentive to compete and create. Bureaucracies may grow bloated, inefficient, or corrupt, slowing down progress and limiting personal freedom. In more extreme cases, socialist states risk turning into authoritarian systems, where the government controls not only the economy, but also the political and social life of its citizens. Critics argue that while socialism promises equality, it can sometimes deliver stagnation and repression if power becomes too concentrated. The lesson of the socialist state is about the search for balance between justice and freedom. It highlights the need for governments to care for their citizens, ensuring that everyone has access to basic needs and opportunities. At its best, a socialist state builds solidarity, protects the vulnerable, and ensures that prosperity is shared. At its worst, it can become rigid, inefficient, or oppressive, forgetting that fairness must also leave room for creativity and individuality. The socialist state reminds us that governance is not only about wealth, but about human dignity. It asks whether progress should be measured by the wealth of a few or by the well-being of all. Its vision is bold, a society where no one goes hungry, no one is left homeless, and no one is denied the chance to live with dignity. Whether or not it is fully achievable, it remains one of the most powerful ideas in political thought, a reminder that equality is not a luxury, but a necessity for true justice. Communist state. A communist state is a form of government built on the ideology of communism, where the state controls the means of production, distribution, and resources with the ultimate goal of creating a classless society. Unlike capitalism, which thrives on private ownership and competition, or socialism, which seeks fairness through state regulation, communism envisions a world where all property is collectively owned and no individual has more power or wealth than another. The guiding principle is simple yet radical, from each according to their ability to each according to their need. The defining feature of a communist state is complete state ownership. Industries, land, and resources are taken out of private hands and placed under collective management, often directed by a centralized government. In theory, this eliminates the exploitation of workers by capitalists, ensuring that wealth and labor benefit society as a whole, rather than enriching a privileged few. The communist state does not merely regulate markets, it abolishes them, seeking to replace competition with cooperation and individual profit with collective welfare. The appeal of a communist state lies in its vision of equality. It imagines a world where hunger, poverty, and inequality are erased because wealth is shared by all. Every citizen has guaranteed access to housing, healthcare, education, and employment, not as privileges but as rights. Supporters argue that communism represents the final step of human progress, where division and exploitation are left behind, and society functions like a united family, working together for the common good. History, however, reveals both the ambition and the struggle of communist states. The Soviet Union, Maoist China, and other nations attempted to build societies on communist principles, restructuring economies, redistributing land, and eliminating private ownership. These systems achieved some successes, such as rapid industrialization, literacy campaigns, and healthcare expansion. Yet they also faced deep challenges: bureaucratic inefficiency, lack of innovation, food shortages, and often authoritarian rule. Instead of achieving a classless utopia, many communist states replaced one hierarchy with another, where the state elite wielded power over the people. The main challenge of a communist state is the concentration of power. When the state owns everything, it often controls not only the economy, but also political and social life. Without competition or dissent, corruption and authoritarianism can take root. The suppression of individual freedoms, speech, enterprise, or choice is often accompanied attempts at communism, leading critics to argue that the system, though noble in theory, is deeply flawed in practice. The lesson of the communist state is a paradox. On one hand, it challenges us to dream of a fairer world, where no one suffers from hunger or poverty, and where community replaces greed. On the other, it warns us of the dangers of too much centralization, where the pursuit of equality erases freedom and individuality. It reminds us that while equality is essential, it cannot thrive without liberty, and that collective good must not come at the cost of human dignity. At its best, the communist state is a bold vision of justice, daring to imagine a society without exploitation or division. At its worst, it becomes a rigid system of control where promises of equality mask the reality of oppression. It stands as one of history's most ambitious experiments in governance, an idea that continues to inspire hope for some and caution for others. Welfare state. A welfare state is a system of governance where the government takes on the responsibility of ensuring the social and economic well-being of its citizens. Unlike systems that prioritize pure market freedom or limited state involvement, the welfare state believes that the government must actively protect people from the harsh realities of poverty, unemployment, sickness, and inequality. It does not reject capitalism outright, but it reshapes it by building safety nets that catch those who fall, ensuring that prosperity is not reserved for the privileged few, but shared by the many. The defining feature of a welfare state is its commitment to social justice. Citizens are guaranteed access to essential services like healthcare, education, housing, and financial support during hard times. The government uses taxation and redistribution policies to fund these programs, creating a balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. The welfare state is built on the idea that a society cannot be truly successful if its members are left behind, and that protecting the vulnerable strengthens the nation as a whole. The appeal of the welfare state lies in security. It promises citizens that even in moments of crisis, illness, job loss, or old age, they will not be abandoned. By reducing inequality, it fosters social stability, giving people the confidence to pursue education, careers, and dreams without the constant fear of disaster. Supporters argue that this system not only protects individuals, but also strengthens democracy itself, because when citizens feel secure, they are more engaged and empowered in shaping their society. Examples of welfare states can be seen across Northern and Western Europe, where countries like Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Germany have developed extensive social safety nets alongside thriving economies. These nations show how welfare policies can coexist with capitalism, creating societies that value both opportunity and fairness. Even outside Europe, many countries adopt welfare state principles, offering universal health care, free education, or income assistance, reflecting the widespread belief that government has a duty to protect its people. Yet, the welfare state also faces criticism and challenges. Providing broad social benefits requires high levels of taxation, which some argue discourages ambition, investment, and innovation. Opponents claim that too much reliance on government support can create dependency, where individuals lose the incentive to work or improve their circumstances. Maintaining welfare programs can also strain government budgets, especially in times of economic crisis, raising questions about sustainability and efficiency. The lesson of the welfare state is about compassion and responsibility. It shows that societies thrive not only by rewarding success, but by protecting those who struggle. At its best, the welfare state creates fairness, dignity, and opportunity, ensuring that no one is left behind in the pursuit of progress. At its worst, it risks inefficiency, dependency, or financial strain if policies are poorly managed or abused. The welfare state reminds us that prosperity is not just about wealth, it is about people. A truly strong society is not measured by how high the powerful can rise, but by how far the weakest are protected from falling. It is a system that challenges us to see governance not only as authority, but as care, responsibility, and shared humanity. Mixed economy system. A mixed economy system is a model of governance and economics that blends the principles of both capitalism and socialism. Instead of relying purely on free markets or complete state control, it seeks a balance, allowing private ownership and competition to drive innovation and growth, while government intervention ensures fairness, stability, and protection for the vulnerable. In many ways, the mixed economy is a compromise, acknowledging that neither extreme system alone can fully meet the needs of a complex society. The defining feature of a mixed economy is dual responsibility. On one side, individuals and businesses are free to own property, create wealth, and compete in the marketplace. On the other, the government steps in to regulate industries, provide essential services, and correct inequalities that markets often create. This might mean offering public health care, setting minimum wages, or regulating monopolies to prevent exploitation. In short, the mixed economy embraces the creativity of capitalism while adopting the fairness of socialism. The appeal of the mixed economy lies in its adaptability. By combining elements of both systems, it avoids the rigidity of complete state control and the harsh inequalities of unchecked capitalism. It allows societies to enjoy economic growth and innovation while also maintaining safety nets that protect people from poverty, unemployment, or exploitation. Supporters argue that this flexibility makes mixed economies stronger and more resilient, able to adjust policies according to changing times and challenges. Examples of mixed economies can be found across the world today. Countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and many European nations operate under this model, where free markets dominate, but governments provide welfare programs, regulate industries, and step in during crises. For instance, during financial collapses or pandemics, governments in mixed economies often intervene by bailing out industries, providing relief funds, or expanding public health care, showing the balance between freedom and protection. Yet, the mixed economy is not without its challenges. Balancing private freedom with public control can create tension. Too much government involvement may discourage innovation and overburden taxpayers, while too little regulation risks inequality, corruption, and social unrest. Critics on both sides argue against the system. Capitalists see it as interference in the market, while socialists view it as protecting private wealth at the expense of true equality. Striking the right balance is a constant struggle that depends on wise leadership and evolving circumstances. The lesson of the mixed economy system is about moderation. It teaches us that neither extreme, total market freedom, nor total government control can fully serve the needs of modern societies. Instead, strength lies in balance, in blending competition with compassion, innovation with fairness, and profit with protection. At its best, the mixed economy offers the benefits of both systems, giving citizens the chance to thrive while ensuring that no one is abandoned. At its worst, it risks becoming inconsistent, pulled in different directions by conflicting demands and political struggles. The mixed economy reminds us that governance and economics are not fixed ideologies but living systems. They must adapt to the times, the people, and the challenges of the moment. It is a system that thrives on balance and compromise, showing that sometimes the middle ground is not weakness, but wisdom. Corporatocracy. A corporatocracy is not an official form of government, but rather a condition where corporations and large business interests hold significant influence over political decisions, policies, and even the direction of society. In a corporatocracy, the lines between economic power and political power blur, creating a system where the wealthiest organizations shape the rules by which everyone lives. Instead of governments ruling over businesses, businesses begin to steer governments, using their resources, lobbying, and influence to protect and expand their interests. The defining feature of a corporatocracy is control through wealth. Corporations, by their sheer size and economic might, become more powerful than elected leaders or state institutions. They may fund political campaigns, influence legislation, or control public opinion through media ownership and advertising. Policies are often crafted not to serve the common good, but to protect profits, reduce regulations, or expand corporate monopolies. Citizens, in turn, may find that their voices are drowned out by the immense financial power of corporate elites. The appeal, or at least the justification, of a corporatocracy is efficiency. Proponents argue that corporations drive innovation, create jobs, and power economic growth, so allowing them influence ensures prosperity for all. Businesses claim that they understand markets better than governments, and their involvement in policy leads to stronger economies. In reality, however, this often means that public interest is sacrificed for private gain, as corporations prioritize profit above fairness, equality, or environmental sustainability. Examples of corporatocracy can be seen throughout history and in modern societies. In the United States, critics often point to the immense influence of lobbyists, pharmaceutical companies, energy corporations, and tech giants in shaping laws and regulations. In other parts of the world, industries such as mining, oil, and finance often dominate politics, ensuring that governments protect their interests at the expense of ordinary citizens. Though not always formalized, corporatocracy is a shadow system, an invisible hand that shapes governance through money and power rather than democratic will. The dangers of corporatocracy are profound. When corporations dictate government policy, inequality deepens. Environmental protections may be ignored, workers' rights may be eroded, and public goods like healthcare, education, or housing may be neglected because they do not generate profit. Citizens may feel powerless, recognizing that their vote matters less than the millions spent by corporations on lobbying or campaign contributions. Over time, this undermines democracy itself, replacing the voice of the people with the will of the market. The lesson of corporatocracy is about vigilance. It reminds us that democracy and freedom can be quietly eroded not only by dictators or monarchs, but by the unchecked influence of wealth. At its best, corporate power can contribute to progress, innovation, and prosperity when guided by responsibility and regulation. At its worst, it becomes an invisible empire, ruling nations without accountability, where citizens are reduced to consumers and governments to servants of profit. Corporatocracy stands as a warning that governance must remain in the hands of the people. If wealth alone writes the laws, then the principles of justice, equality, and freedom are no longer protected. It challenges us to ask, who truly governs, the leaders we elect or the corporations that finance them? Colonial government. A colonial government is a system of rule imposed by a foreign power over a territory and its people. In this structure, the colony is not independent, but is controlled politically, economically, and culturally by another nation, often one that is far away. The colonizers establish institutions, laws, and systems of authority that serve their own interests, usually exploiting the land and resources of the colony while limiting the rights and freedoms of the local population. At its core, a colonial government is about domination, one society ruling over another. The defining feature of colonial government is foreign control. Decisions about the colony's future are not made by its people, but by officials sent from the ruling nation, or by local elites loyal to the colonizers. Laws, taxes, and economic policies are crafted to benefit the empire, not the colony. Colonized populations often find themselves excluded from power, their cultures suppressed, and their voices silenced. The government becomes a tool of extraction, designed to channel wealth and resources outward, leaving the colonized dependent and disempowered. The appeal of colonial government, at least from the perspective of the colonizers, was justification through power and ideology. Colonizing nations claimed they were bringing civilization, religion, or progress to the lands they ruled. They argued that colonies benefited from new infrastructure, trade networks, or education systems. In reality, however, these benefits were usually limited and designed to serve colonial interests rather than empower the local people. For the colonized, colonial government often meant loss of sovereignty, loss of cultural identity, and loss of self-determination. Examples of colonial governments are found throughout history. The British Empire established colonial administrations across Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Caribbean, often imposing laws and institutions that reflected British interests. The French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Dutch also built vast colonial empires, each shaping the territories they controlled. These governments differed in form. Some allowed limited local participation, while others imposed direct rule, but their essence remained the same. Power flowed from the colony to the colonizer. The consequences of colonial governments were far-reaching. While some colonies gained infrastructure and exposure to global trade, most were left with deep scars, economic dependency, artificial borders, and cultural suppression. Resistance often brewed under colonial rule, as people longed for independence and the right to govern themselves. Many modern nations today were once colonies, and their struggles for freedom were often fueled by the injustices they endured under foreign rule. The lesson of colonial government is about the dangers of domination disguised as progress. It shows how easily power can justify itself through ideology while exploiting those under its control. At its worst, colonial government strips people of their identity, voice, and resources, leaving generations to rebuild long after independence is achieved. At its best, if one can call it that, it provides a framework of institutions that some post-colonial nations later adapted for their own governance, though usually at great cost. Colonial government stands as both a historical reality and a warning. It reminds us that true governance must come from within, shaped by the people it serves. Any system imposed from outside, no matter how well dressed in promises of progress, risks becoming a cage where sovereignty is stolen and freedom is postponed. Protectorate. A protectorate is a political arrangement where one state maintains control or strong influence over another, often under the guise of offering protection. Unlike a full colony, where the ruling power directly governs every aspect of life, a protectorate allows the local government to exist, but places it under the shadow of a stronger state. In practice, the protectorate becomes dependent, retaining its flag, leaders, or identity, but lacking true sovereignty. The stronger power dictates key matters such as defense, foreign policy, and sometimes even trade or internal law. The defining feature of a protectorate is partial sovereignty. The weaker state appears independent, but its most crucial decisions are shaped or outright controlled by the protecting power. Often the arrangement is presented as a form of partnership. The stronger nation promises to shield the weaker from external threats in exchange for influence, resources, or loyalty. However, this protection is rarely selfless. More often, it is a way for powerful nations to extend control without taking on the full responsibility of direct colonial rule. The appeal of a protectorate, particularly to the stronger state, lies in control without cost. By allowing local governments to handle day-to-day affairs, the dominant power avoids the burden of full governance while still reaping the benefits of influence. For the weaker state, the arrangement can sometimes seem like a safeguard, an assurance of survival in a dangerous world. Smaller nations may accept protectorate status to avoid invasion or to gain the backing of a stronger ally, but this protection often comes at the price of independence, making the protectorate little more than a nation in name. History offers many examples of protectorates. During the era of European imperialism, Britain established protectorates in places like Egypt, Zanzibar, Ibar, and the Trucial States, modern-day United Arab Emirates. France and other colonial powers also used protectorates as a way to expand influence without assuming full colonial administration. Even in modern times, some territories operate in arrangements similar to protectorates, where a stronger power controls defense and foreign relations while allowing limited local governance. The challenges of protectorates are clear. While they may offer temporary stability or protection, they often leave the protected state powerless to shape its own destiny. Local leaders may be forced to serve foreign interests rather than their people, creating resentment and resistance. Over time, protectorates can become stepping stones to outright colonial control or spark independence movements as people demand full sovereignty. The lesson of the protectorate is about the illusion of independence. It shows that sovereignty cannot be partial. Either a nation controls its own destiny or it does not. At best, a protectorate provides stability for a smaller or weaker nation in times of danger. At worst, it is a cage painted as a shield, where protection is simply another word for domination. Protectorates remind us that true freedom cannot exist under the shadow of another's power. Protection may feel safe, but if it comes at the cost of independence, it is no longer protection. It is control disguised as care. Client state. A client state is a nation that outwardly appears independent, but is heavily influenced, guided, or controlled by a more powerful country. Unlike a protectorate, where protection is the justification for interference, a client state exists in a relationship of dependency, political, economic, or military, where the stronger state dictates major policies behind the scenes. The client state may keep its leaders, flag, and national identity, but its sovereignty is compromised, as its decisions often reflect the interests of its patron more than the needs of its own people. The defining feature of a client state is dependency. The weaker state relies on its more powerful ally for survival, security, or resources, and this reliance comes at the cost of true independence. Client states often follow the foreign policies, economic strategies, or even military directions of their patrons, even when these run counter to their own interests. Their leaders may maintain control at home, but the price of that control is loyalty to the stronger power that sustains them. The appeal of the client-state relationship is stability. For the dominant nation, it is a way to project influence across the world without directly ruling foreign lands. Instead of maintaining costly colonies or protectorates, the patron shapes global politics through allies who remain formally independent but functionally aligned. For the weaker nation, becoming a client state may provide protection from rivals, financial aid, or military assistance. Yet this support comes with invisible strings, ensuring that dependency grows stronger over time. History provides many examples of client states. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union both built networks of client states across the globe. Countries like South Korea and West Germany aligned closely with the U.S., while Eastern European nations like Poland or East Germany became Soviet client states. Their policies, alliances, and even internal governance were often shaped by the interests of their powerful patrons. Even today, many small or developing nations are seen as client states of larger powers, bound by aid packages, trade deals, or military agreements that limit their independence. The dangers of being a client state are significant. While such arrangements may provide security or aid, they often leave nations vulnerable to exploitation. Local leaders may prioritize the wishes of their patrons over the needs of their people, creating resentment and unrest. If the patron state withdraws support, the client state may collapse, exposing its fragile foundations. Moreover, client states can become pawns in larger geopolitical struggles, caught between rival powers who see them as tools rather than as sovereign nations. The lesson of the client state is about the fragility of independence when it is compromised by dependency. It shows that true sovereignty is more than a flag or a seat in the United Nations. It requires the ability to make decisions free of outside coercion. At best, client states gain stability, development, and protection under the wing of a powerful ally. At worst, they lose their voice, their identity, and their agency, becoming little more than instruments of foreign ambition. A client state reminds us that alliances should be chosen, not imposed, and that the survival of a nation depends on its ability to stand, not as someone else's pawn, but as its own master. Dependency may bring temporary safety, but in the long run, it erodes freedom. Occupied government. An occupied government is a form of administration imposed on a nation or territory after it has been conquered or taken over by a foreign power. In this system, the occupied people live under the authority of an external force, often with their own government reduced to a shadow of its former self, or replaced entirely by officials chosen by the occupiers. Unlike a protectorate or client state, which may maintain a facade of independence, an occupied government operates under direct control where the occupier makes the rules and the occupied are forced to comply. The defining feature of an occupied government is loss of sovereignty. The people of the occupied territory do not have the freedom to shape their laws, choose their leaders, or determine their future. Instead, decisions are dictated by the occupying power, which often enforces its will through military presence, censorship, and suppression of resistance. Local governments, if allowed to exist at all, are stripped of real authority and reduced to administrative tools that carry out the occupier's agenda. The justification for occupation is often framed in terms of security, order, or necessity. Occupying powers claim they are bringing stability, ending conflict, or ensuring peace. In reality, occupations are usually driven by strategic interests, whether that means controlling territory, exploiting resources, or weakening rivals. The people who live under occupation are rarely given a choice. Their land becomes a prize in someone else's struggle for power. Examples of occupied governments can be found throughout history. After World War II, Germany and Japan were placed under occupation, with their governments restructured by the Allied powers. In other cases, occupations have been more exploitative, such as when invading armies install puppet administrations to extract wealth and suppress resistance. Even in modern times, occupations exist where foreign troops or administrations rule territories against the will of the local population, often sparking decades of unrest and conflict. The consequences of an occupied government are often devastating. Daily life becomes controlled by outsiders who may prioritize their own interests over the well-being of the population. Citizens may face restrictions on movement, speech, and political participation. Resistance movements often emerge, leading to cycles of violence, repression, and instability. Occupations rarely feel temporary to those who endure them. They feel like the theft of sovereignty, culture, and dignity. The lesson of the occupied government is about the cost of domination. It reminds us that no society thrives under foreign control, no matter how noble the justification may sound. At best, an occupied government can serve as a bridge to rebuilding and independence, as seen in post-war Germany and Japan. At its worst, it becomes a system of exploitation, oppression, and humiliation, where people are denied their right to self-determination. An occupied government stands as a stark reminder that sovereignty is precious, and when it is stolen, even temporarily, the wounds can last for generations. Freedom is not simply the absence of chains. It is the ability to govern one's own future, free from the will of outsiders. Occupation strips that away, replacing choice with control and independence with submission. Legitimate government. A legitimate government is one that is accepted by its people as rightful, lawful, and just in its authority. Legitimacy is not simply about holding power. It is about the belief that this power is deserved and exercised in accordance with shared values, traditions, or laws. A government may control territory through force, but without legitimacy, its rule is fragile. True legitimacy comes from the consent of the governed, the trust of the people, and the perception that leaders act not only for themselves, but for the common good. The defining feature of a legitimate government is public recognition. Citizens may disagree with policies, criticize leaders, or demand reforms, yet still recognize the government's right to govern. This recognition can be rooted in different sources. In democracy, it comes from free elections and the will of the people. In monarchies, it may stem from tradition or divine right. In revolutionary states, it can emerge from the promise of a new order. Whatever the source, legitimacy is what transforms power into authority. The appeal of a legitimate government lies in stability. When people accept their leaders as rightful, society functions with less resistance. Laws are followed not just out of fear of punishment, but because they are seen as fair and binding. Citizens may sacrifice, pay taxes, and even fight for their country when they believe the government truly represents them. Legitimacy builds trust between rulers and the ruled, creating unity in times of crisis and resilience in times of change. Examples of legitimate governments can be found across history. The United States, for instance, derives legitimacy from its constitution and regular elections, which reaffirm the people's will. In contrast, a monarchy like the United Kingdom sustains legitimacy through centuries of tradition combined with democratic instinct. Even revolutionary governments, such as those formed after independence struggles, gain legitimacy when the people view them as the true expression of freedom and sovereignty. The challenge for any government is maintaining legitimacy. Corruption, oppression, or betrayal of promises can erode trust, causing citizens to question whether their leaders deserve power. A government that loses legitimacy may cling to force, censorship, or manipulation to survive, but this only deepens the divide between rulers and people. In history, many revolutions, uprisings, and civil wars have erupted not because governments lacked strength, but because they lacked legitimacy in the eyes of their people. The lesson of legitimate government is about trust and consent. It shows that power alone is never enough to rule. What truly sustains a government is the belief of its citizens that leadership is fair, just, and rightful. At its best, a legitimate government creates harmony, stability, and shared purpose. At its worst, when legitimacy is lost, the nation risks chaos, rebellion, or collapse. A legitimate government reminds us that authority is not given permanently. It must be earned, maintained, and renewed through fairness, justice, and accountability. The moment people no longer believe in their leaders, the government ceases to be legitimate, no matter how strong its military or wealthy its treasury. True legitimacy is built not on fear, but on trust. Provisional government. A provisional government is a temporary authority established to lead a nation during a time of transition. Unlike permanent governments built on established systems, laws, and institutions, a provisional government exists in moments of uncertainty, after a revolution, the collapse of a regime, the end of war, or during the birth of a new state. Its role is not to rule forever, but to stabilize, restore order, and prepare the ground for a more permanent political structure. The defining feature of a provisional government is impermanence. It is born in extraordinary circumstances, often when the old system has fallen and a new one has not yet emerged. Leaders of provisional governments are usually chosen quickly, sometimes by revolutionaries, sometimes by foreign powers, and sometimes by popular movements desperate for stability. Their authority is fragile, derived less from long-standing legitimacy and more from necessity. People accept them not because they are the ideal rulers, but because someone must govern in the chaos. The appeal of a provisional government lies in hope. It represents the possibility of a new beginning, a bridge between turmoil and stability. For citizens, it is a symbol that society has not collapsed completely, that order can be restored, and that a future government will eventually reflect their will. For leaders, it is a chance to shape the foundations of what comes next, drafting constitutions, organizing elections, and rebuilding institutions. History provides many examples of provisional governments. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, a provisional government briefly ruled before being overthrown by the Bolsheviks. In France, after World War II, Charles de Gaulle led a provisional government that guided the nation from occupation toward democracy. Provisional governments also emerge after independence movements, as in African and Asian nations that transition from colonial rule to self-governance. In each case, these governments carried the enormous responsibility of turning instability into structure. But provisional governments also face immense challenges. Because they are temporary, they often lack full legitimacy or long-term authority. Different groups may compete for influence, seeing the provisional period as a chance to push their agendas. Citizens may grow impatient if change does not come quickly, and enemies of the new system may try to destabilize it. At times, provisional governments collapse into dictatorship, civil war, or further chaos, showing how fragile these transitional moments can be. The lesson of a provisional government is about transition and trust. It teaches that even in times of collapse, societies need structures to hold them together while they search for stability. At their best, provisional governments act with humility, focusing not on personal power, but on preparing the path for the people's will to prevail. At their worst, they become stepping stones to new forms of tyranny, where temporary rule turns permanent, and promises of transition are betrayed. A provisional government reminds us that power is not always about permanence. Sometimes its greatest strength is knowing when to step aside, when to hand the future to the people, and allow a new, lasting system to grow. It is in these fragile, uncertain moments that nations decide who they are and who they will become. Transitional government. A transitional government is a fragile bridge stretched between two worlds, the fading structure of the old order and the uncertain shape of what will replace it. It exists not as a final destination, but as an in-between stage, entrusted with guiding a nation through profound change. Such governments rarely emerge in stable times. They are often born from moments of rupture, revolutions, civil wars, regime collapses, or the end of foreign occupation. Their task is heavy, to rebuild while restraining themselves, knowing their authority is temporary by design. The focus of a transitional government is not long-term rule, but preparation. It may draft new laws or constitutions, organize elections, reform broken institutions, and stabilize a society fractured by mistrust and conflict. Leaders often come to power through negotiation among rival factions, mediation by international actors, or compromises with remnants of the old regime. What binds them together is a single urgent mission: to hand over a functioning, legitimate state to those who follow. The power of such a government is unique, immense in responsibility, yet limited in lifespan. This creates constant tension. Every decision must balance immediate stability with the vision of a better future, and the clock is always ticking. Errors made during this fragile period can shape the political landscape for generations, either fostering justice or cementing corruption. The danger lies in the temptation to cling to power. Many transitional governments throughout history have promised to be temporary but delayed elections, expanded their authority, or turned into the very regimes they were meant to replace. Without transparency, accountability, and clear boundaries, the bridge risks becoming a permanent structure, trapping a nation in limbo between democracy and dictatorship. For ordinary citizens, the experience is both hopeful and uneasy. The promise of renewal stands alongside the fear of returning to chaos. Every change is scrutinized, every promise weighed against scars of the past. Yet in these moments of vulnerability lies rare opportunity, a chance to break cycles of oppression and reshape the rules of society itself. Ultimately, a transitional government is a test. It is a test of leaders, tasked with wielding temporary power wisely. It is a test of the people, charged with staying vigilant, demanding accountability, and ensuring that the bridge truly leads forward, not back. Shadow government. A shadow government is the unseen hand moving behind the curtain, a hidden power that operates parallel to the official state yet outside its authority. It is a structure that thrives in secrecy, sometimes claiming to be the rightful ruler in exile, sometimes presenting itself as a government in waiting, and other times existing as a quiet but potent network, already shaping the course of a nation from the dark. Its very name suggests both presence and absence, a government that does not stand in the light of legitimacy, but one that still casts influence over everything within its reach. At its core, a shadow government embodies the belief that the current authority and power is illegitimate or temporary. Somewhere, unseen by the public, a rival order prepares to step forward, insisting that it, not the government in office, represents the true future of the state. Sometimes this takes the form of exiled leaders, driven from their homeland but unwilling to abandon their claim. From foreign soil, they build councils, draft manifestos, and maintain loyal followers. They send whispers, coded letters, and digital messages across borders to remind the people at home that their rule has not been extinguished, only waiting to return. In these cases, the shadow government is sustained by memory and hope, a reminder to citizens under oppressive regimes that another vision for their country still exists. Other times, a shadow government operates not in exile, but within the very country it seeks to control. It becomes a web of secret alliances, hidden institutions, and covert operations, networks of influence that steer policy, corrupt officials, or sabotage authority from the inside. Unlike governments in exile, these shadows do not wait for permission to rule. They entangle themselves with the machinery of power itself, pulling invisible strings while remaining unseen. They thrive in spaces where mistrust is already high, working behind closed doors to destabilize leaders and weaken institutions until the moment is right to emerge. The presence of a shadow government can cut in two directions. In nations ruled by dictatorships or foreign occupation, it may act as a lifeline, a beacon of hope that keeps alive the idea of liberation. For those living under oppression, the shadow offers reassurance that someone is working in the dark, preparing to step forward when the regime collapses. Yet in fragile democracies or struggling states, its existence can be deeply corrosive. By spreading suspicion, undermining authority, and destabilizing institutions, it creates division and erodes public trust in the very structures holding society together. To some, it appears as salvation. To others, as sabotage. Its greatest strength lies in invisibility. A shadow government moves in whispers, encrypted communications, clandestine meetings, and unseen transfers of resources. Its influence is rarely acknowledged openly, but its fingerprints may be found in sudden shifts of policy, mysterious collapses of leadership, or uprisings that seem to ignite from nowhere. And because it thrives in secrecy, it is immune to the checks and balances that restrain legitimate governments. There is no vote to remove it, no court to challenge it, no visible face to hold accountable. It lives in the spaces beyond law, where silence is its shield and anonymity its weapon. In its most dangerous form, a shadow government is not merely waiting to replace power, it is already entwined with it. From within the official state, it exerts pressure, manipulates decisions, and steers outcomes, all while remaining hidden. To the people, the nation appears whole, its leaders seemingly in control. Yet beneath the surface, another hand is quietly drafting the next chapter of their history. By the time its presence becomes visible, it may already be too late to alter the course it has set. A shadow government is both promise and peril. It can be a force of liberation, preserving the hope of change where none seems possible, but it can just as easily be the architect of instability, the unseen author of chaos. Its power is not measured in public speeches or visible armies, but in the silent certainty that somewhere, out of sight, another government waits, watching, planning, and deciding the fate of a nation before the people ever know the choice has been made. Puppet government. A puppet government is a shadow wearing the mask of authority. It appears, at first glance, to rule itself, to stand as the sovereign voice of its nation. It flies a flag, crowns a leader, convenes a parliament, and may even hold elections. Yet behind this facade, its strings are pulled by a more powerful hand, and its movements are scripted by forces outside its borders. To its people it presents the image of independence, but its survival, its policies, and its very heartbeat depend entirely on the will of a foreign master or hidden overseer. The leaders in office become actors, reciting lines they did not write, delivering decisions that are not their own. Such governments often arise from conquest, foreign occupation, or suffocating external influence. For the controlling power, a puppet regime serves as a convenient disguise. Rule by proxy appears softer, less invasive than open domination. It is easier to maintain order when citizens are allowed the illusion that they still have a government of their own, even if its choices are nothing more than echoes of instructions whispered from elsewhere. The puppet's task is not to govern freely, but to provide a cloak of legitimacy for policies crafted in another capital. It is to sign away treaties, approve laws, and enforce directives, all while pretending to act in the name of the people. For citizens, life under a puppet government feels like existing inside a stage play, where the scenes are carefully arranged to look authentic, but the script is written abroad. Leaders smile from balconies, deliver speeches of loyalty, and make promises of progress. Yet when critical decisions are made, over trade, defense, resources, or freedoms, the answers do not come from those on the podium, but from the unseen power pulling strings. Resistance to these outside masters is rarely tolerated, not because the puppet is strong, but because behind its fragile frame stands the weight of the real authority, ready to silence dissent in order to protect its investment. The tragedy of a puppet government is its betrayal of familiarity. It wears the face of home. Leaders who speak the language, wave the national flag, and invoke history, yet the substance of its actions serves foreign interests. It may sign away natural resources, entangle its economy in exploitative arrangements, or suppress voices of protest not out of conviction but obedience. Its loyalty never belongs to its citizens, but to the external force that keeps it in place. A puppet may sit in the palace, but the palace doors are opened and closed by another's hand. Yet such arrangements are fragile by nature. The illusion of independence lasts only as long as the people either believe in it or choose to tolerate it. Once the strings are exposed, once it becomes undeniable that sovereignty is an act and not a reality, the legitimacy of the puppet collapses. Without genuine trust, it cannot govern on its own. Without the protection of its master, it cannot survive. Its power, never real to begin with, evaporates the moment permission is withdrawn or the people rise to cut the strings themselves. A puppet government, then, is a reminder of the hollow shell sovereignty can become. It rules not by the will of its people, but by the allowance of those beyond its borders. No matter how skillfully it performs its role, no matter how convincing the illusion of authority, it is a government in name only. Its fate is never truly its own, for the hand that animates it can release it at any moment, leaving behind only the memory of a flag that flew without wind and a voice that spoke without power. Failed state. A failed state is a nation that has lost the very heartbeat of governance. It is a country where the machinery of authority has broken down, where the bonds between government and people have unraveled, and where sovereignty exists in name only. In such a place, the law no longer carries weight, institutions no longer function, and the state's most basic responsibilities, protecting its citizens, providing order, and maintaining stability, are abandoned to the chaos of collapse. What remains is a hollow shell of nationhood, a map that still marks borders, but within which order has dissolved into uncertainty. Life in a failed state is defined by fear and instability. Public services vanish or remain only as fragile fragments. The once familiar rhythms of civic life, schools opening their doors, courts upholding justice, markets operating under law, disappear, replaced by a daily struggle for survival. Roads become unsafe to travel, borders porous, and violence a constant companion. In the vacuum left by a broken state, power splinters into the hands of militias, warlords, and criminal networks, each carving out territory to rule by force. Citizens find themselves not under the protection of a state, but under the rule of whichever armed group controls their streets on any given day. The collapse of a state is rarely sudden. It begins as hairline fractures in the foundation, corruption hollowing out institutions, economic crises deepening poverty, political divisions that grow too wide to bridge. Over time, these cracks spread until the government no longer commands legitimate authority over its land or its people. In many cases, the capital city still stands, its officials issuing decrees and making speeches. Yet beyond its walls, authority fades, and citizens see little more than empty promises. The image of governance remains, but its substance has vanished. For the people living through it, the failure of the state is both physical and psychological. The sense of abandonment can be as devastating as the dangers themselves. Trust in leadership evaporates, and the idea of a shared national identity begins to erode. Without a functioning state to anchor them, citizens are left adrift, forced to rely on kinship networks, local leaders, or whatever authority fills the void. Foreign aid may arrive in the form of food, medicine, or supplies, but with no stable government to distribute it, much is siphoned off by armed groups or lost to corruption. Refugees flee across borders in search of safety, leaving behind hollowed-out cities and countryside scarred by conflict. A failed state is not simply a government in crisis. It is a government that has ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. It represents the breakdown of the social contract itself, where the promise of mutual protection and shared order has been shattered. The police who once kept order vanish or turn into private enforcers. Courts no longer uphold justice, but lie abandoned or corrupted. The military, if it still exists, splinters into factions, each serving its own interests. The state, once the vessel of collective identity, becomes little more than a ghost. And yet, even in the ruins, the human instinct to endure persists. Communities find ways to organize, however imperfectly. Local leaders emerge, often outside official structures, to provide basic services or security. Families and neighborhoods create networks of support to survive in the absence of state protection. In these small acts lies a faint pulse of resilience, a reminder that even when governments fail, societies can cling to the will to rebuild. Still, until stability is restored, a failed state remains a dangerous vacuum. It is a place where the rule of law has crumbled, where violence often fills the silence left by order, and where survival becomes the measure of daily life. The word state itself lingers more as memory just than as reality, and its people are left to navigate the ruins of sovereignty, waiting for the moment when the pulse of governance might return. De facto government. A de facto government is power stripped of ceremony, legitimacy, or pretense. It is rule in its rawest form, authority not granted through constitutions or elections, but seized, imposed, or inherited through sheer persistence. It may lack the blessing of law, the approval of courts, or the recognition of foreign states. Yet none of that matters when it commands the armies, controls the streets, collects the taxes, and dictates the lives of those within its grasp. In practice, it governs, whatever the outside world may say. Such governments often rise from the ruins of upheaval. After a coup sweeps away the old order, after a revolution tears down the existing regime, after a state collapses under corruption or war, or in times when the official authorities can no longer enforce their will, the de facto government steps in to fill the void. Power abhors a vacuum, and these regimes claim it with speed and decisiveness. They may seize control through military might, strategic alliances, or simply the fact that no one else can maintain order. The people may not have chosen them, but their presence is inescapable. To live under such a government is to acknowledge, willingly or not, that it is the power you must answer to in order to survive. For de facto rulers, legitimacy is not measured by constitutions or international endorsements. Legitimacy, in their eyes, is proven through control. Courts may deny their authority, constitutions may declare them illegal, and the world may refuse to recognize them. But if their soldiers stand at checkpoints, if their administrators collect taxes, if their police enforce rules, then their rule is real. Their word becomes law, not because it has been codified, but because it is backed by the machinery of power. Recognition abroad may be withheld, but within their territory, they are the reality that people must navigate every day. Yet the existence of a de facto government is never free of tension. Its power may seem absolute in the short term, but its survival depends on two paths: transforming into a recognized legal authority, or maintaining enough force to suppress challenges indefinitely. Enemies are ever present, rivals at home who see their rule as illegitimate, or foreign powers who back competing factions. Every decision is haunted by fragility, for a single misstep can unravel control and expose weakness. Stability is always provisional, secured only as long as fear, loyalty, or necessity keep the people in line. For citizens, life under a de facto government is a precarious balancing act. The rules are clear only so long as those in power maintain their grip. Allegiances are dangerous to declare too openly, as today's ruler may be overthrown tomorrow. Some adapt, working within the new reality for the sake of stability, even if they do not recognize its legitimacy. Others resist, clinging to the hope that recognized law will return, or that international pressure will one day restore the old order. For most, survival means learning to navigate a world where power is real, but legality is absent. A de facto government is a reminder that in politics, reality often outweighs legality. Constitutions, treaties, and laws may dismiss its claim to rule, but as long as it controls force and directs the machinery of daily life, it governs. Its authority may lack recognition, but recognition alone does not command soldiers, guard borders, or decide who eats and who starves. As long as it can impose order and enforce its will, it exists, not as theory, but as lived reality. De jure government. A de jure government is the authority recognized by law, the government that, on paper and in principle, holds the legitimate right to rule. It is the government written into constitutions, upheld by treaties, and acknowledged by the formal structures of international recognition. Its claim to power is validated not by sheer force or control of the streets, but by its legal standing. In the eyes of the law, it is the rightful ruler, even if in practice its reach is fractured, contested, or reduced to little more than a name. This kind of government often carries with it the weight of history and legitimacy. It may be the product of democratic elections, the successor to a long-standing constitutional tradition, or the authority officially acknowledged by the global community of nations. On the world stage, such recognition matters greatly. A de jure government has the right to sit at international assemblies, to sign treaties, to appoint ambassadors, and to represent the nation in the eyes of others. Its seal, its name, its presence grants the state a seat at the table of diplomacy, even if its grip at home is weak. But recognition does not always equal control. A de jure government can be celebrated in name while stripped of real authority, existing in exile, or presiding only over fragments of its claimed territory. Sometimes it is little more than a distant voice, leaders operating from foreign capitals, issuing decrees to a homeland they cannot physically touch. At other times, it sits in a capital city surrounded by symbols of legitimacy, yet beyond its walls, rival powers hold sway. In these moments, the legal truth and the lived reality diverge sharply, creating a tension between what is rightful and what is actual. Often, the greatest rival to a de jure government is a de facto power, a regime that commands the military, polices the streets, and collects the taxes. Where the de jure government holds recognition, the de facto government holds reality. One rules in principle, the other rules in practice. For citizens, this divide can be disorienting. On paper, their nation is led by one authority, but in daily life, it is another power that dictates their survival. For supporters, the de jure government embodies legitimacy, continuity, and the rule of law. It is the guardian of sovereignty, even if its strength has been stripped away. It is the rightful authority, holding fast to the belief that law will eventually realign with power. To its opponents, or to those living under rival control, it can seem like a ghost government, a distant name claiming ownership over a land it no longer governs. Its presence can feel symbolic, a reminder of what once was, or a hope for what might return. The survival of a de jure government depends on recognition, both domestic and international, and on the persistence of its claim. Foreign states may maintain embassies in its name, the United Nations may reserve its seat, and its officials may carry passports and issue decrees. These acts keep alive the thread of legitimacy, even when authority has slipped through its hands. For those resisting occupation or rival regimes, the de jure government becomes a symbol of endurance, proof that might does not erase legality, and that rightful sovereignty can outlast the power of force. Yet, until law and reality are reunited, a de jure government remains a ruler in title rather than in fact. It can shape documents, attend conferences, and represent ideals, but its true strength lies in the hope that recognition and legitimacy will one day reclaim the ground lost to raw power. Until then, it exists as a paradox, sovereign by law, fragile in practice, waiting for the day when authority will no longer be confined to words on paper, but restored in the lived reality of its people. Emergency government. An emergency government is born in the heat of crisis. It is a form of rule that emerges when a nation faces dangers so great that the ordinary laws, balances, and limits of governance are set aside in the name of survival. Such governments often arise in moments of war, devastating natural disasters, economic collapse, or uprisings that threaten to tear apart the stability of the state. In these times of extraordinary upheaval, leaders claim extraordinary powers, insisting that speed, unity, and decisive action matter more than the slow, careful processes of normal governance. The usual balance between liberty and authority tilts sharply toward control, and the machinery of the state transforms into something built for endurance rather than deliberation. Under an emergency government, the familiar rules of daily life can change overnight. Freedoms that once felt untouchable, speech, movement, privacy, are curtailed in the name of security. Curfews descend over cities. Military forces patrol streets once governed by civilian law. Decisions that would normally require debate in open chambers are made swiftly and in secret, justified by urgency rather than consensus. Laws are rewritten, expanded, or suspended entirely, leaving citizens to navigate a world where the boundaries of state power are suddenly much harder to see. The justification is always the same. In extraordinary times, extraordinary measures are necessary. To some, this concentration of power feels like protection, a shield raised against the chaos at the nation's door. Swift decisions can save lives. Coordinated action can prevent collapse. A single commanding voice can cut through the confusion of fear and rumor. In such moments, many citizens accept the trade, surrendering freedoms for the promise of safety. They tell themselves it is temporary, a necessary pause until the storm passes, and normal life resumes. But the danger of an emergency government lies not only in the vast powers it assumes, but in the question of how long it will hold them. What begins as temporary can quietly take root, extending long after the original crisis has ended. The tools created to defend the nation can be repurposed to control it. Leaders who taste unchecked authority may find it difficult to relinquish, and a frightened public may hesitate to demand its return. A curfew meant to stop riots becomes routine. Surveillance introduced for security becomes normalized. Exceptional powers become the new normal. History is filled with examples of emergency governments that did not fade when the crisis was over. Some hardened into authoritarian regimes, using the excuse of lingering threats to justify permanent control. Others created legal precedents that expanded executive authority far beyond the moment of emergency, leaving future generations with fewer freedoms than before. The line between protection and repression grows dangerously thin when necessity is used as justification for unchecked rule. For citizens, living under an emergency government means existing in a state of constant tension. On one hand, there is hope that the sacrifices demanded, restricted freedoms, heightened surveillance, obedience to rapid decrees, are truly temporary, necessary to shield society from collapse. On the other hand, there is fear that those sacrifices will never be returned, that the walls built to protect will instead harden into the bars of a permanent prison. Trust becomes everything. Trust that the leaders who wield such power are motivated by duty rather than ambition, and trust that the people themselves will remember to reclaim their liberties once the danger has passed. An emergency government is, by design, a system forged for the moment, not for the long haul. It is a blunt instrument crafted to stabilize a nation in crisis. Its legitimacy rests on a fragile promise that once the storm subsides, the extraordinary powers it holds will dissolve, and the country will return to the slower, fairer rhythms of normal governance. Whether that promise is kept or broken determines if an emergency government is remembered as a shield that protected the people, or as the moment when fear was transformed into permanent rule. Single-party state. A single-party state is a nation where political power is bound tightly in the grip of one ruling organization, a system in which no rival parties are allowed to challenge its dominance. Here, the party is not merely a political institution competing for influence. It becomes the very spine of the state itself, shaping laws, directing policy, and defining national identity. The machinery of governance and the machinery of the party are fused so completely that to oppose one is to oppose the other. In such a system, the state does not simply serve the people. It serves the party, and the party in turn presents itself as the embodiment of the nation. Life under a single-party state is defined by political uniformity and the absence of open competition. Elections may still occur, but they are often orchestrated performances, carefully staged to maintain the image of public participation while ensuring that power remains firmly in the hands of the ruling elite. The legislature, courts, and executive function less as independent branches of government and more as extensions of the party's will. Media outlets echo its ideology, education systems teach its version of history, and culture itself is often curated to reinforce loyalty. Over time, the party ceases to appear as one option among many. It is presented as the natural, unquestionable order of society, the sole vessel through which the nation can exist. Supporters of single-party systems often highlight their ability to act with unity and decisiveness. Without the constant struggle between competing factions, policies can be implemented quickly and consistently. Long-term projects, industrialization, infrastructure, national defense can be pursued without the risk of reversal at the next election cycle. In times of war or crisis, this cohesion can provide stability, ensuring that the government speaks with one voice and acts with firm coordination. For some citizens, this sense of order fosters pride, discipline, and national unity, strengthening the belief that the ruling party is the guardian of the nation's destiny. Yet, the same unity that allows for efficiency also carries dangers. Without meaningful opposition or public accountability, the ruling party risks becoming insulated from the realities of everyday life. Criticism is often redefined as disloyalty. Dissent is painted as betrayal of the state itself. Laws may be written to criminalize opposition, and citizens quickly learn that survival depends not only on obedience, but on displays of loyalty. The space for independent thought shrinks, and the line between patriotism and submission blurs. In such an environment, fear becomes a quiet companion of daily life, and silence often speaks louder than words. The dominance of a single party can also breed stagnation. Without competition, innovation in governance slows, corruption takes root, and leaders become more focused on maintaining control than on addressing the needs of the people. Citizens may still participate in rallies, elections, and civic rituals, but these events often serve more as affirmations of the party's power than as genuine expressions of choice. Over time, frustration simmers beneath the surface, expressed only in whispers or in the quiet disillusionment of those who no longer believe change is possible. For some, the single-party state is a source of stability and identity, a system where the chaos of division is replaced by unity and direction. For others, it is a narrowing cage, a place where individuality is surrendered for conformity and where questioning the order is dangerous. Its greatest strength, its concentration of authority, can also be its greatest weakness. When the ruling party falters, when it loses touch with the people or fails to deliver on its promises, there is no alternative prepared to take its place. In such moments, the entire structure risks collapse, not because it was weak, but because it was built on the assumption that its rule would never be challenged. In the end, a single-party state represents both the promise of unity and the peril of unchecked control. It can forge a nation into a disciplined whole, but it can also hollow it out from within, leaving behind a fragile order where the fate of the state rests entirely on the survival of one party's grip. Multi-party system. A multi-party system is politics at its most vibrant, a stage where many voices, visions, and ideologies contend for influence, each striving to shape the nation's future. Unlike systems dominated by a single party or restricted to two choices, it rejects the idea that one narrative alone can define an entire people. Instead, it replaces monotony with diversity, offering citizens a chorus of perspectives to weigh, debate, and embrace. In such a system, the future belongs to no one party. It is forged through competition, cooperation, and compromise. At its core, the multi-party system reflects a simple truth. A nation is never a monolith. Its citizens are divided by culture, class, region, religion, and values, and no single banner can speak for them all. Political parties rise to represent these varied interests. Workers may rally behind labor movements. Entrepreneurs support business-oriented platforms. Environmentalists champion ecological protections. Conservatives defend tradition. Progressives push for reform. Centrists call for balance. And nationalists emphasize sovereignty. Each group carries its own hopes, fears, and grievances into the arena, and the ballot box becomes the place where these competing visions meet. The system creates a political marketplace of ideas, where citizens are free not just to accept what is offered, but to challenge, compare, and demand better. The great strength of a multi-party system is its resistance to domination. Because power is dispersed, no single group can easily impose its will without negotiation. Parties often must form coalitions to govern, weaving alliances across ideological divides. This necessity fosters dialogue, forcing leaders to seek compromise and to build policies that reflect a broader spectrum of society. Citizens gain reassurance from this balance, knowing that policies are rarely dictated by one unchecked ideology, but instead tempered by debate and cooperation. The very act of coalition building can strengthen the social fabric, reminding diverse groups that their survival depends on working together. Yet, this diversity is also the system's greatest challenge. With many parties pulling in different directions, governance can become slow, fragile, and uncertain. Coalitions may fracture under pressure, governments may collapse, and elections may be called again and again. For citizens weary of endless bargaining, the system can appear messy or indecisive, a structure where political gamesmanship takes priority over action. In times of crisis, whether economic collapse, war, or national emergency, the need for unity may clash with the reality of division, testing the patience of both leaders and the public. For ordinary people, however, the multi-party system offers something precious: genuine choice. Unlike systems where options are limited, here citizens can align themselves with movements that truly reflect their values, instead of settling for the lesser of two evils. It creates space for new voices to rise, for fresh ideas to challenge entrenched powers, and for marginalized groups to enter the conversation. Minority parties, though small, can exert real influence by joining coalitions, ensuring that their supporters are not erased from national politics. This openness keeps the system alive, dynamic, and ever-evolving. A thriving multi-party system is rarely quiet. It is noisy, restless, and often messy. Parliaments echo with arguments, newspapers fill with clashing editorials, and citizens themselves join in the debates that shape their future. Yet beneath this seeming disorder lies its deepest strength, the conviction that no single voice should ever speak for all. It embodies the belief that democracy is not measured by silence or conformity, but by the willingness to allow disagreement, competition, and dialogue to flourish. In the end, a multi-party system is not about creating harmony, but about managing diversity. It does not seek to erase differences, but to channel them into a process where many can contribute to the shaping of the nation. Though it may stumble, argue, and falter, it carries within it a vital truth: that the health of a democracy is found not in the ease of governance, but in the richness of the people's collective voice. One-person rule. One-person rule is the purest concentration of power into a single set of hands. It is governance stripped of balance, where one individual's will becomes the axis upon which the entire nation turns. In such a system, parliaments, courts, and councils exist only in name or are bent to serve the ruler's desires. There are no genuine rivals, no meaningful checks, no mechanisms of restraint. Decisions that affect millions are made not after debate or deliberation, but in the sudden impulse of one mind. It is authority distilled to its rawest form, absolute and indivisible. This kind of rule often emerges in the wake of chaos. War, economic collapse, revolution, or deep political paralysis create a vacuum in which the promise of clarity and strength becomes irresistible. People, exhausted by division and disorder, rally behind a single figure who promises to restore stability, to cut through the confusion of weak governments, and to act swiftly where others hesitate. In its earliest days, one-person rule can even feel like relief. No endless bargaining, no fragile coalitions, no stalemate, just action, decisive and immediate. But clarity quickly hardens into domination. The voice that once seemed to speak for the people gradually narrows until it speaks only for itself. Under one-person rule, loyalty becomes the currency of survival. Institutions bend or break to fit the ruler's desires. Courts lose independence, becoming tools of enforcement rather than shields of justice. Laws exist not to limit authority, but to codify it. Dissent, once a civic right, becomes a dangerous gamble. What was once criticism is rebranded as disloyalty, and disloyalty as treason. Fear seeps into daily life. Fear of speaking out, fear of being noticed, fear of drawing the ruler's disfavor. The ruler's presence becomes inescapable. Their image appears on currency, on walls, in sholal, old books. Their speeches are broadcast daily, their words echoed through newspapers, media, and classrooms. History itself is rewritten to place them at its center, casting them as savior, guardian, or visionary. In such an environment, the very idea of the nation becomes entwined with their name, their personality, their myth. To oppose them is framed not merely as political dissent, but as betrayal of the country itself. For those closest to power, the danger is no less real. Ministers, generals, and advisors live in a constant state of caution, aware that the same hand that elevates them can destroy them overnight. Trust becomes fragile, alliances shallow, and ambition perilous. A ruler who tolerates no limits creates a system where survival depends not on ability, but on proximity and obedience. This breeds corruption, flattery, and fear more than competence or truth. Yet one-person rule carries within it a deep fragility. However invincible it may appear, it rests entirely on the will, health, and control of a single human being. Remove that person, by death, by defeat, by uprising, and the system often collapses into chaos. Unlike governments built on institutions, laws, or shared power, one-person rule leaves little behind that can endure beyond its leader. Its structures are designed to serve one, not to sustain themselves. What follows is often a scramble for control, as rivals or factions seek to claim the throne vacated by the solitary figure who once dominated all. For citizens, living under such a system is a paradox. It can bring stability, but only so long as the ruler's interests happen to align with the people's needs. It can deliver decisive action, but at the cost of liberty and participation. Over time, the nation ceases to be a collective project and becomes a reflection of one individual's ambitions, fears, and flaws. The country's fate rises and falls with the moods of a single mind, its stability chained to the strength or weakness of one person. One-person rule is power at its most concentrated, its most efficient, and its most dangerous. It promises clarity and order, but its legacy is uncertainty, for it rests not on institutions or law, but on the fragile foundation of a single human life. Anarchism. Anarchism is the rejection of rulers, a radical vision of society built not on hierarchy or imposed authority, but on the conviction that people can govern themselves without kings, presidents, parliaments, or masters of any kind. It is often caricatured as chaos, as the absence of order, but anarchism is instead the belief that genuine order arises not from control, but from cooperation. That communities can organize themselves through mutual agreement rather than decrees handed down from above. At its core, anarchism rests on a simple yet revolutionary idea. that human beings, when freed from domination, can shape systems of justice and fairness more humane than any imposed government could ever design. In an anarchist vision, power is decentralized. Decisions are made not by elites in distant chambers, but by the people themselves, through collective deliberation, direct democracy, or consensus. Responsibility is shared, and no one is born into servitude or denied participation. There is no permanent ruling class, no state machinery to dictate laws from above, no military to enforce obedience on the unwilling. Instead, communities form networks of voluntary cooperation, building systems around shared needs and values. Conflicts are not suppressed by force, but addressed through dialogue, mediation, and agreement. Anarchism demands not just freedom, but accountability. For in the absence of rulers, each individual becomes responsible not only for themselves, but for the well-being of their community. The appeal of anarchism lies in its promise of liberation. In its world, no one's voice is silenced by the weight of power. No law exists solely to protect the privileged, and no institution looms above the people it claims to serve. It offers the dream of a society where relationships are based not on coercion, but on consent. A society where cooperation is voluntary, solidarity genuine, and equality not an abstract principle, but a lived reality. For its believers, anarchism represents the fullest expression of human dignity, life without chains, guided only by the agreements we freely choose to make. Yet anarchism is not without its challenges. It assumes a level of respect, empathy, and cooperation that human societies have often struggled to maintain. Without a centralized authority, there is the risk that the strong may still dominate the weak, that rival groups may fracture into hostility, and that conflicts, once inflamed, may spiral without clear resolution. Critics argue that human nature, with its ambitions, rivalries, and fears, is ill-suited for such a fragile balance. To them, anarchism is less a blueprint for stability and more a utopian dream. But for many, anarchism is more than a plan for a stateless future. It is a challenge to the present. It forces us to ask, why is power so often concentrated in the hands of the few? Why do we accept the structures of authority that dominate our lives as natural or inevitable? Must law always mean coercion? Must order always mean obedience? Anarchism is both a vision of freedom and a critique of submission, a call to question not just how we are ruled, but whether we need rulers at all. Ultimately, anarchism dares humanity to imagine differently. It envisions a society where the chains that bind us are not imposed from above, but forged together willingly, out of trust and mutual need. Whether one sees it as an achievable horizon or an unreachable dream, anarchism endures as both a philosophy of resistance and a test of human possibility. The belief that true freedom is not found in domination, but in the shared responsibility of living as equals. Panarchy. Panarchy is the radical reimagining of governance itself, a daring vision that dissolves the old link between geography and political rule. In a panarchic society, individuals are not bound to the government of the land where they were born, or the nation whose borders enclose them. Instead, they freely choose the system of governance under which they wish to live, as easily as one might choose a religion, a profession, or a community. Here, politics becomes personal, not territorial. Authority is not imposed by geography, but selected by consent. To live under panarchy is to inhabit a world where neighbors no longer share a single government, simply because they share a street. One household may live under a socialist republic, another under a constitutional monarchy, while a third aligns with a libertarian federation, all existing within the same physical space. Political identity becomes fluid and voluntary, tailored to belief rather than dictated by location. Revolutions, in this world, lose their meaning. There is no need to overthrow a regime to live differently, for each person can opt out without moving away. The ballot box becomes less a battlefield of majority versus minority, and more a contract of choice, each citizen aligning with the system that speaks to them. The promise of panarchy lies in its vision of peace. Political conflict as we know it could dissolve, for disagreement would no longer require struggle. If you reject the rules of your current government, you do not fight to change them. You simply withdraw your allegiance and affiliate with another. Panarchy envisions a marketplace of governments, each competing for citizens by offering better laws, fairer treatment, or more appealing services. In this framework, people cease to be passive subjects bound by birthright and instead become empowered clients, able to leave behind systems that fail them. The pressure shifts to governments themselves, which must earn loyalty not through coercion, but by delivering value. Yet this vision, as liberating as it is, also carries immense complexity. If two neighbors are bound to different governments, how are disputes settled between them? Which authority steps in when conflicts cross jurisdictions? How does law enforcement function when its legitimacy depends not on shared territory, but on voluntary contracts? The machinery of society, so long dependent on a single framework of rules, would be forced into new models of negotiation, arbitration, and coexistence. Panarchy demands a degree of tolerance, respect, and cooperation rarely achieved at scale in human history. To its supporters, panarchy represents the purest expression of liberty, a world where no one is compelled to live under laws they did not choose, where political loyalty is voluntary, and where coercion vanishes from the very structure of governance. To its skeptics, it feels dangerously idealistic, perhaps even unworkable. Without shared obligations and norms, they argue, society could fracture into endless divisions, a patchwork of rules so complex that stability itself becomes fragile. Still, the allure of panarchy lies in its bold refusal to accept that the state must be a monopoly. It imagines governance as a service, not a destiny, something you opt into, not something pressed upon you at birth. In such a world, freedom does not begin with elections or revolutions, but with the simple power to decide who, if anyone, governs you at all. Whether seen as utopian or practical, panarchy stands as a challenge. To imagine a society where the boundaries of politics are no longer drawn on maps, but in the choices of individuals, free to shape their allegiances as fluidly as their lives.